Welcome to Asgard, not the Marvel one, but the wild, strange, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying mythology of the Norse gods. Here, wisdom comes at the cost of an eye, justice may cost you a hand, and love. Well, love might just bring about the end of the world. These are not your usual gods. Some are brave, some are broken, some are silent, and others never stop talking. Some rule with honor, some lie, cheat, and set everything on fire. Sometimes literally. So, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade away. Because tonight, we tell the stories of Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, and the rest of that chaotic divine family. It's a little tragic, a little ridiculous, and absolutely fascinating. Let's begin. Odin, the Allfather. Odin is a figure both feared and revered, as distant and unknowable as the sky on a winter's night, yet as intimate as the breath before a prayer. His name in Old Norse, Odin, comes from odr, a word that wraps around the meanings of inspiration, frenzy, poetic madness, and divine ecstasy. It suggests not just wisdom in the calm, scholarly sense, but something far more volatile, a burning, searching intensity, a desire to know at any cost. And that's exactly who he is. Not a god content with what is given, but one who tears apart the fabric of the universe to understand it. Even if it means tearing himself apart in the process. He is the god of wisdom, of poetry, of war, and of death. A strange and powerful mix, because those domains aren't merely roles, they're reflections of the human soul under pressure. Odin doesn't rule over them from afar. He lives in them. He walks battlefields, not just to watch, but to choose the slain. He whispers into the ears of poets, not to flatter them, but to drive them mad with visions. And when it comes to wisdom, it's never handed to him freely. He gave one of his eyes to drink from the well of Mimir, because real knowledge, the kind that breaks illusions, comes with a price. He hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, pierced by his own spear, for 9 nights. Alone, hungry, cold, staring into the abyss. All for the runes, symbols of magic, of language, of fate. Odin didn't become wise by sitting still. He earned it in blood and silence. He carries Gungnir, a spear that never misses its mark, carved with runes that make it unstoppable. He wears a cloak that sweeps like a storm, and a hat pulled low to hide the empty socket where his eye used to be. On either shoulder perch 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. Every morning, they fly out across the world, gathering news, returning at dusk to whisper it all in Odin's ear. At his feet, 2 wolves, Geri and Freki, pace like shadows. In a hall called Valhalla, he welcomes the bravest dead, those who died sword in hand, offering them a place at his table until the day they must rise again. These aren't just symbols. They are the extensions of Odin's being, like a mind that has grown limbs and wings and teeth, reaching into every corner of the cosmos. Odin's family tree is as tangled as a forest of old roots. He is the son of Bor and the giantess Bestla, a child born of gods and Jötnar, bridging the divine and the primal forces of nature. His brothers, Vili and Ve, helped him shape the world from the corpse of the primordial giant Ymir. He took a wife, Frigg, the queen of Asgard, wise and reserved, who knows the future but rarely speaks it aloud. He fathered Baldr, the radiant, the beloved, whose death will signal the unraveling of all things. There's Thor, the thunderer, born of another union, more warrior than philosopher, but loyal to his father. And there's Loki, blood brother, not by blood but by bond, mercurial, treacherous, and strange. Their relationship is complicated. It always was. Stories of Odin are never simple. There is the tale of how he brought the mead of poetry into the world, tricking a giantess, transforming into an eagle, and flying across the sky with the stolen nectar in his throat. There is the time he wandered the world in disguise, cloaked and unnamed, testing the hearts of men, seeking truths hidden in their lives and lies. He often appears not as a shining deity, but as an old man at the edge of the firelight, with one eye that sees too much. Sometimes he rewards, sometimes he punishes, but always he learns. Odin is a seeker, even when what he finds brings sorrow. His relationships with other gods reflect this. With Thor, he shares a bond of purpose, if not always perspective. Thor sees in straight lines, Odin sees in spirals. With Loki, there's both kinship and doom, a bond born of shared cunning and mutual betrayal. With Frigg, there's silence, the kind only two who know too much can share. He is revered, but not always loved. He's a god you respect, not a god you lean on. He is presence and absence at once, watching from afar, even as he shapes the events beneath his gaze. When Ragnarök comes, the twilight of the gods, it is Odin who rides at the front, leading the doomed into the final battle. He rides his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, across the sky toward his death. He knows it's coming. He has seen it in dreams, heard it in the whispers of the dead. But he doesn't flinch. He faces Fenrir, the monstrous wolf born of Loki's line, and he is swallowed whole. He dies, not in retreat, but as part of the story he helped shape, a death written into the bones of the universe. In the old days, Odin was worshipped by kings and poets, warriors and mystics. Sacrifices were made in his name, not just offerings of food or wine, but sometimes of blood. His name was spoken in times of war, when wisdom was as necessary as strength. There were no grand temples in Norse lands like those of Greece or Rome, but sacred groves, standing stones, and wind-swept hills held his spirit. Rituals were often harsh, mirroring the cold truths Odin embodied. He is traditionally shown as a tall figure, cloaked and hooded, with a long beard and a missing eye. In carvings, he's sometimes seated on a high throne with his ravens perched nearby. In poems, he's the masked traveler, the one who speaks in riddles, the one who knows your fate before you do. And always, there is something solemn about him. Not cold, but deeply serious, like a man who carries the weight of too many truths. Ravens, wolves, and horses surround him, creatures of cunning, strength, and motion. They are not pets. They are pieces of his soul, drawn outward. And his powers, well, they stretch across the sky. He can change his shape, send his spirit flying while his body sleeps. He can see what has been and what will be. He knows the runes, and through them, the secrets of language, magic, life, and death. In modern times, Odin walks new paths. In comic books and blockbuster movies, he is reborn in armor and light, a father figure reimagined for crowded theaters. In video games, he whispers again to players who seek runes and power. But beneath the costume and the special effects, something ancient still lingers. The real Odin isn't glossy or golden. He's the presence in the woods when the wind goes quiet. He's the voice that asks what price you're willing to pay for truth. He has many names. Allfather, the Wanderer, the One-Eyed, Grimnir. Each name is a mask, each mask a truth. And symbolically, he is the seeker. The part of us that refuses to accept ignorance. The yearning for meaning that drives us past comfort and into the unknown. He is the wise man, yes, but also the fool who leaps into the abyss, trusting that somewhere, somehow, understanding will catch him. Not all who seek knowledge do so gently. Odin never did, and perhaps neither do we. Frigg, Odin's wife, goddess of marriage. In the vast and echoing halls of Norse mythology where the winds whisper the names of gods long gone and the stars themselves seem carved from old stories, there lives a figure both revered and quietly feared. Not for the roar of her wrath, but for the weight of her silence. Her name is Frigg. Spoken in Old Norse as Frigg, her name is thought to stem from the root frigo, meaning beloved or free. But there is more to her than a name. It carries the breath of home fires, the hush of secrets kept, the soft ache of knowing what is to come, and choosing not to stop it. She is not simply Odin's wife. She is the sky itself that watches over his wandering steps, and the silence between fates already decided. Frigg walks not with a sword or a spear, but with a presence that stills a room. She is the goddess of marriage, of motherhood, and of prophecy. But unlike others who flaunt their powers, she holds hers close. She is the weaver of destinies, sitting by her loom in Fenrir, her hall that echoes with the sound of spinning thread and unseen futures. Her powers do not lie in brute force or trickery, but in the quiet wisdom of knowing what lies ahead, and the terrible burden of it. She sees, yet does not always act. She knows, and carries that knowledge like an iron crown beneath her veils. In a world where gods boast in battle, Frigg remains, watching, remembering, waiting. Her personality is not one easily contained by words. She is gentle, yes, and loving, fiercely so. But beneath the warmth of a mother and the grace of a queen lies a deeper current, one of sorrow, patience, and steel. She is wise in a way few others are, and it makes her distant. Not aloof, but heavy with what she cannot say. She is a keeper of secrets, a bearer of grief, and in her own quiet way, just as formidable as any god of war. She doesn't shout, she doesn't need to. Frigg holds no famous weapon, but she doesn't need one. Her might lies in her foresight and her role as a divine intercessor. Her most sacred possession is not forged in fire, but is instead her own gift, the ability to know what is to come, and yet carry on. Some say she shares Odin's ability to see into the future, but while Odin rushes into fate to challenge it, Frigg watches it unfold with the solemn dignity of someone who understands the cost of every thread she pulls. Her hall, Fenrir, the Hall of Mists, is shrouded in mystery, much like her. It suggests that even among gods, there are things hidden, things sacred. Her family tree, like most in Norse tales, is a tangled, half-lit tapestry. She is married to Odin, and together they have a son, Baldr, the shining god of light, beauty, and all that is good in the world. She loves Baldr deeply, perhaps more than anything, and it is through her grief over him that we come to know her best. Frigg, foreseeing Baldr's death, tries to change fate. She travels to every corner of creation and secures promises from all things not to harm him. Fire, water, stones, trees, even diseases. But she overlooks one thing, a small and seemingly harmless plant, the mistletoe. And it is through that oversight, that tiny crack in an otherwise flawless plan, that tragedy spills into Asgard. When Loki, ever the mischief maker, learns of this, he crafts a spear from mistletoe and tricks Baldr's blind brother Hoder into throwing it. Baldr dies. Frigg's grief is not just sorrow, it is cosmic, trembling through the 9 realms like a storm that has no end. She weeps, not just for her son, but for the world that could not be saved despite her knowing. Her relationships with other gods are quietly potent. She is respected, even by those who would challenge Odin himself. Freya, who shares similar domains over love and fate, is sometimes seen as a mirror to Frigg, though the lines between them are blurred in myth. Loki, though never her ally, becomes her tragic foil. In some ways, Frigg is what Loki will never be: steady, trusted, dignified. She represents the bonds that Loki seeks to unravel. And with Odin, there is a strange and tender tension. They are not a fairy tale couple. They are old souls, deeply entwined, often apart, but never truly distant. Odin wanders the worlds, seeking knowledge and risking all. Frigg stays behind, already knowing what he will find, and choosing to let him go. When Ragnarök comes, the end of all things, Frigg's fate is left in shadow. The stories tell of Odin falling to Fenrir, of Thor battling the Midgard Serpent, of gods dying and some returning. But Frigg is not spoken of in those final verses. She is absent from the battlefield, or perhaps simply unrecorded. Maybe she survives. Maybe she watches, her hands trembling over her loom as the threads snap one by one. Or maybe she is the last to fall, not in combat, but in sorrow. A mother losing her child a second time. A queen watching her kingdom burn. In the old days, people prayed to her not for strength in battle or riches in trade, but for peace in their homes, safe childbirths, the return of loved ones from long journeys. She was honored in private ways, in whispered prayers and quiet hearths. Temples to her were few, but her name was carried in the hearts of those who kept the fire burning through the coldest winters. Depictions of her are rare and sparse, but always noble. She is shown in long robes, often with a spindle or keys at her side, the symbols of domestic power, of stewardship and control over fate. She is not adorned in armor, but in patience and grace. Sometimes she is veiled, her face hidden, a nod to the unknowable future she holds within. Her companions are not warriors, but symbols. There are tales of her having falcons or hawks, and at times she is said to borrow a cloak of feathers to fly through the skies, though this is also attributed to Freya. Like much in Norse mythology, the line between them blurs, and perhaps that's fitting, for fate itself is rarely distinct. Her abilities are profound. She can see what lies ahead, though she does not always speak of it. She holds sway over the bonds between people, love, loyalty, kinship. There is a magic in that, quieter than spells and less showy than shapeshifting, but no less real. And sometimes more dangerous. In modern times, she appears in the stories we still tell. In comics and films, her image has been reshaped, often reduced, but she lingers. In Marvel's universe, she becomes Frigga, the regal queen of Asgard, a mother figure once again, though simplified for the screen. In games and novels, she returns in fragments, echoes of her old power. But beyond media, she survives in the archetypes we carry with us. She is the wise mother, the silent prophet, the keeper of things too heavy to speak aloud. She is the reminder that love often comes with loss, and that knowing the future doesn't always mean you can change it. In the theater of the gods, she is not the loudest voice, but hers is the one that lingers long after the curtain falls. Thor, god of thunder. When you think of thunder rolling over the mountains, of the kind that shakes the very bones of the earth and lights the sky with fire, you're hearing his footsteps. Thor. His name in Old Norse, Thor, comes straight from the word for thunder itself. Not a metaphor, not a nickname, but the storm made flesh. He isn't an echo of power. He is power, raw and alive. You don't just speak his name, you feel it. It carries the weight of the skies in turmoil, the steady promise of protection, and the brutal honesty of a storm that doesn't pretend to be anything else. And there is something very human in that, unapologetic strength, but not without purpose. Thor is the god of thunder, yes, but his reach extends far beyond the skies. He is the guardian of Midgard, the human world, and by that token, he is the protector of the ordinary folk. Farmers, fishermen, the people who lived close to the land and needed more than wisdom and riddles to get by. He represents physical strength, unshakable courage, and a kind of grounded loyalty that never hides behind clever words. He is not a god of tricks. He is not polished. He is not subtle. And yet, in a world of gods who often speak in riddles and hide truths in layers of meaning, there is something profoundly comforting about a deity who simply is what he seems to be. He is force, channeled through love. Now, when you picture Thor, you're not seeing silk robes or jeweled crowns. You're seeing the hammer, Mjolnir, short-handled, lightning-forged, impossibly heavy, and utterly loyal. No weapon is more famous in the Norse world. It's not just a tool of destruction, it's a symbol of defense, consecration, and power. With it, Thor can crush mountains, summon thunder, and strike down giants in a single blow. But Mjolnir is more than muscle. It is sacred. It was used to bless marriages and births, to ward off evil, to link the gods with humankind in ritual and in myth. And then there are his iron gloves, Jarngreipr, and his belt, Megingjord, which doubles his already staggering strength. These aren't trinkets. They're extensions of who he is. His family ties, like most in Asgard, are a tapestry of legend and paradox. Thor is the son of Odin, the Allfather, and of Jord, the personification of the earth herself. That's no accident. He is literally born of sky and soil. His stepmother is Frigg, and though the stories don't often dwell on that bond, you can feel the threads of that complicated household underneath the tales. He has brothers and half-brothers, most notably Baldr and Loki. And Loki, that's a relationship that defies simple labels. They are sometimes companions, sometimes adversaries, sometimes foils. They ride together, fight side by side, and yet Loki's chaos always rubs against Thor's order like flint against steel. Thor's wife is Sif, a golden-haired goddess often connected to the grain and the harvest, and together they have a daughter, Thrudr, whose name means strength, and who in some stories is just as formidable as her father. Thor also fathers sons with other women, including Modi and Magni, who inherit his might and survive the twilight of the gods. There are more stories of Thor than perhaps any other Norse god. He travels often, not to seek wisdom like Odin, but to test his strength, to confront chaos, to keep the boundaries of the world intact. One tale tells of him losing Mjolnir to the giant Thrym, who demands the goddess Freyja in return. But Thor, disguised as Freyja herself, crashes the wedding feast and reclaims the hammer in a blaze of violence and laughter. Another tells of his journey to the hall of Utgarda Loki, where he is tricked into wrestling old age, lifting a disguised serpent that encircles the world, and drinking from a horn connected to the sea. He fails at each task, but only barely. And in those failures, we see his depth, not invincibility, but relentless effort. He is not a god who cannot be beaten. He is a god who will never stop trying. With the other gods, Thor is both kin and contrast. He respects Odin, though they do not see the world the same way. Odin deals in sacrifice and secrets. Thor deals in action and consequences. With Loki, the relationship is always on the edge. At times almost like brothers, at others like enemies barely held in check. Yet, when the hammer swings and the frost giants rise, they stand together, if only for a moment. Thor doesn't speak much of love or loyalty. He shows it, over and over again. And when the end comes, Ragnarök, Thor does not hide. He rides out to face Jormungandr, the great Midgard serpent, his ancient nemesis. It is the battle of sky and sea, of protector and destroyer. He slays the serpent, but the poison is too strong. He takes 9 steps before he falls, and in that image is everything he is. A god who dies on his feet, still moving forward, still trying to shield the world. Among the Norse people, Thor was not just admired, he was beloved. He was the everyman's god. Farmers wore hammer amulets. Oaths were sworn in his name. Even into the age of Christian conversion, his name lingered. Thursday, Thor's Day, still marks his place in our calendar. He was worshipped not with elaborate temples, but in sacred groves, in carved stones, in the daily rhythm of life and struggle. He is often described as red-bearded, broad-shouldered, with fierce eyes and a booming laugh that could shake the clouds. Not elegant, but unforgettable. And while Odin walks with ravens and wolves, Thor's companions are goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster, who pull his chariot across the sky. He can slaughter and eat them, then resurrect them with his hammer, so long as their bones are kept whole. Even his meals obey the cycle of death and rebirth. Magic, in the subtle sense, is not his domain. He does not weave illusions or see through time. But his powers are no less wondrous. He can command the weather, summon storms, crash through worlds. His strength is not metaphor. It is real, and it is devastating. In modern stories, Thor appears often, but rarely unchanged. Marvel gives us a Thor in a new form. Sometimes regal, sometimes comedic, but always circling the same core. He is not the philosopher or the trickster. He is the warrior, trying to do right with a strength that sometimes feels more burden than gift. In games, in novels, in films, his hammer still falls, and people still cheer. In the end, Thor stands as an archetype that humanity will never let go of. He is the strong arm that shields, the brute force used for good, the defender of those who cannot defend themselves. But more than that, he is the embodiment of what it means to try, even when fate says no. In a world of broken promises and encroaching night, Thor reminds us that sometimes, the only thing standing between chaos and the rest of us is the one who never stops swinging. Baldr, god of light, beauty, love, and happiness. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a room when someone beautiful walks in, not just in form, but in spirit. It's not loud, it's not boastful, it just is. And that's what Baldr was to the gods. He was the light without fire, the warmth without heat. His very presence seemed to lift the air around him, to smooth the edges of the hard world the Aesir lived in. His name, Baldr, from the Old Norse, carries with it echoes of boldness and brightness. And not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that simply exists, as inevitable and undeniable as the dawn. He was beauty in its quietest form, the god of light, love, and joy, and the cruel irony of it all is that the gentlest soul was the first to be broken. He wasn't the strongest, nor the wisest, He wasn't a warrior like Thor, nor a schemer like Loki, nor a seeker like Odin. But he held something none of them could claim, the love of all. Plants, animals, gods, humans. They looked at Baldr and saw something worth protecting, something that made them feel, for just a moment, that maybe the world wasn't all storm and sorrow. He didn't need to carry a weapon or forge spells in secret. His power was his innocence, his unshakable goodness, and that was both his blessing and his curse. Because in a world built on struggle and sacrifice, someone that pure was like a candle in a hurricane. His family tree reads like a poem soaked in contradiction. He was the son of Odin, the god who gave an eye for wisdom, and Frigg, the mother who saw too much and still couldn't stop fate from rolling forward. Baldr had brothers, one of them Hoder, blind and fated to do the unthinkable. The other was Thor, the thunder that shook the bones of giants. But where Thor roared and Odin brooded, Baldr simply shined. He had a wife, Nanna, who loved him with a stillness that rarely gets told in myths, because it wasn't filled with scandal or betrayal. It was just love. Real love. The kind that breaks a person when it's lost. The most well-known tale about Baldr isn't a tale of glory or conquest. It is a tragedy, pure and sharp as ice. You see, Baldr began to dream of his own death, dreams that clung to him like mist. And in those dreams was the end of all things. His mother, Frigg, desperate and loving, made everything in the world swear not to harm him. Rocks, metals, trees, animals, diseases, even fire itself. And everything agreed, except for mistletoe. A small, unassuming plant, deemed too young, too harmless to be a threat. But when you leave even a sliver of space, fate finds its way in. The gods made a game of it, throwing stones, shooting arrows, hurling weapons at Baldr, only to see them bounce harmlessly away. And in the shadows stood Loki, watching with a smile that never touched his eyes. He crafted a dart from mistletoe, handed it to Hoder, the blind brother who loved Baldr as much as any of them, and guided his hand. The dart flew, struck, and Baldr fell, not with a scream, but with silence. A silence that wrapped around the gods and left them hollow. The light had gone out. And in that moment, the clock toward Ragnarök began to tick. Baldr's death wasn't just a loss, it was the wound the gods couldn't heal. Odin sent another son, Hermodr, to ride to Hel and beg for Baldr's return. And Hel, the goddess of the dead, said she would release him if all things wept for him. And they did. The mountains, the rivers, the trees, the beasts. But one thing did not. A giantess, maybe Loki in disguise, stood still and refused. And so Baldr remained in the underworld, and the world above grew a little colder. At Ragnarök, when the fires rise and the world breaks open, Baldr returns. Not to fight, not to rage, but to begin again. In the new world, reborn from ash and sorrow, Baldr lives once more. Because you cannot kill light forever. It only waits. Though he wasn't widely worshipped like Thor or Odin, Baldr's name still carried weight. He was the god that humans longed for in the quiet moments, the kind that didn't ask for sacrifice, only reflection. The myths don't speak much of temples or rites in his name, but they don't need to. Baldr was felt more than followed. He represented everything people wished the world could be: kind, gentle, fair. In the old carvings and the surviving poems, he's often described as radiant, glowing like the sun against the shadows of Asgard. He has no beasts beside him, no serpents or ravens or wolves, only the presence of grace, of his power wasn't in destruction or prophecy. It was in being untouched, uncorrupted. That's a kind of magic in itself, to be the one good thing in a world preparing for war. And even now he walks among us, not as a god in the modern world, but as a symbol. He lives in the stories we tell about innocence lost too soon, in the figures we create in books and films to represent beauty and peace just before the storm. You'll find him in pop culture, sometimes as a tragic figure, other times as a forgotten one. But he's always there, just behind the veil. Marvel mentions him, though rarely explores him deeply. Others, like the game God of War, reimagine him with pain and bitterness. Yet even in those twisted mirrors, you can still glimpse the truth. Baldr is the light we always hope will return. In the end, Baldr isn't just a myth or a character. He is the part of us that remains soft in a hard world. The part that believes in something better, even when we know how the story ends. And when the last battle is over, and the fire cools to ash, it is that part of us, quiet, golden, and unbroken, that will rise again. Tyr, god of war and justice. Some men fight because they love war, others fight because they must. But then, there are the few, very few, who take up arms, not for glory, not for vengeance, not even for pride, but because justice demands it. Tyr was that kind of god. In a pantheon full of giant slayers, stormcallers, and tricksters, he stood tall, not because of his might alone, but because of his unwavering sense of what ought to be. He was the kind of figure you didn't cheer for, but quietly respected. The kind who didn't he need to raise his voice to make you feel the weight of his words. His name, Tyr in Old Norse, carries the same root as the word for God itself, as if the very idea of divinity once mirrored his essence. There's symbolic weight there, heavy and quiet. Tyr was, in many ways, the god of the old order. Law, judgment, the hard kind of fairness that doesn't flinch even when it cuts deep. He was the god of war, yes, but not the frenzied chaos of the battlefield. His war was cold, disciplined, just. The kind fought with a clear mind and a steady hand. He embodied honor in a way the others didn't. Odin schemed, Thor roared, Loki danced with fire. But Tyr, he stood firm. He made decisions no one else would, and paid the price no one else dared to. And the most enduring tale of him, one that still echoes in the minds of those who know the old stories, is the one where he holds out his hand, knowing full well what it will cost because someone had to do what was right. You see, the gods once raised a wolf, not just any wolf, but Fenrir, child of Loki, destined to grow beyond their control, a creature tied to the end of all things. But he was a pup once, and the gods tried to raise him gently, hoping perhaps fate could be tricked by kindness. When Fenrir grew large and the threat he posed became clear, they tried to bind him with chains, but the wolf was no fool. He would only allow it if one god proved his honesty by placing a hand in the beast's mouth as a sign of trust. No one stepped forward, no one, except Tyr. And when Fenrir realized he had been deceived, he bit down. Tyr lost his hand, but kept something far more rare, his integrity. And that, more than any weapon, was what he wielded. Unlike many of the gods, Tyr doesn't appear in sagas as often, and perhaps that's fitting. He's not the type you notice in the noise. He's the one standing at the edge of the fire, watching, measuring, waiting for the moment when his judgment is needed. His family history is uncertain. Some say he was Odin's son. Others say he came from an older, even more ancient line. But what's clear is that Tyr was older than most in spirit. There's no scandal attached to his name, no tales of vanity or deceit, just one God and one truth, and a world that didn't always reward it. When the end comes, when Ragnarök rises from the smoke and the sea boils and the sky breaks open, Tyr doesn't run. He doesn't hesitate. He meets Garm, the monstrous hound who guards Hell's gates, and there, the god of law and the beast of death destroy one another. No tricks, no betrayals, just fate and the end of it. And in that clash, there is something achingly human. The knowledge that doing the right thing doesn't always mean surviving. Sometimes, it just means standing your ground until the last breath. Tyr wasn't the most worshipped among the Norse gods, but he was respected. In the older times, when war was personal and the line between vengeance and justice grew thin, they looked to him. Not to guide the spear, but to weigh the reasons behind it. The old Germanic tribes called him Tiwaz, and his name lingers still in Tuesday, Tyr's Day. You may not notice it when you say it, but part of him walks with you through the week. He's rarely described in great detail, but the carvings and inscriptions that survive show him one-handed, resolute, a symbol of what it means to lose something vital for something greater. He's not surrounded by animals, no familiars whispering secrets or walking at his side. He doesn't need them. Tyr's symbolism is in action, not appearance. And if he had any magic, it wasn't the kind that moved mountains or bent fate. It was the kind that reminded others what true strength looks like when it must quiet and still. In modern stories, Tyr appears from time to time. He's reimagined in games, in comics, in books, often a soldier, sometimes a judge, Never flashy, always solemn. You'll find him in God of War, where his wisdom contrasts with the brutality around him. You'll see echoes of him in figures who sacrifice not because they're told to, but because they believe it's right. That's his legacy, not as a god of bloodlust, but as the one who drew the line in the dirt and held it, even as the world burned. Tyr, in the end, stands for the part of us that knows right from wrong when no one's watching. The part that doesn't need reward or recognition, only the quiet knowledge that something good was protected. And in a world full of voices shouting over one another, maybe that's what we need most. One hand less, 1,000 battles lost, but the soul intact. That was Tyr. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes him unforgettable. Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost. There is a kind of solitude that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from watching everything while the world forgets you are even there. That was Heimdall's burden. Not a king, not a conqueror, but a sentinel. A lone watcher posted at the threshold of the divine, where colors bled across the sky, and gods came and went as they pleased, while he remained at his post, day and night, rain and frost. He stood by the Bifrost, that shimmering rainbow bridge between Midgard and Asgard, and he never closed his eyes. Not once. Because if he did, the cost would be far too great. In the old tongue, his name, Heimdallr, has no clear meaning etched in stone. Some think it comes from the roots of the one who illuminates the world, or the world brightener. And whether that's fact or poetic instinct, it fits. Heimdall wasn't just a guard in armor. He was the light on the edge of danger, a presence so alert, so attuned to the flow of the cosmos, that nothing, no whisper, no shadow, no thought carried on the wind, escaped him. He could hear grass growing. He could see for hundreds of miles. He needed less sleep than a flame in the night. And while most gods stood for something grand like war or wisdom or fate, Heimdall's domain was vigilance. Constant, patient, enduring. He was said to have been born of 9 mothers, sea maidens, all of them. That alone tells you this was no ordinary god. The sea, after all, gives birth only to what can endure pressure, silence, and the eternal pull of the unseen. Some say he was Odin's son, though the old myths argue among themselves, as myths so often do. Heimdall had no consorts to speak of, no tangled lines of drama or revenge. His life was not measured in passion or trickery, but in the stillness of his station. In his hand he carried a horn, Gjallarhorn, a relic of finality, one that would one day shake the 9 worlds with its sound. He never used it, not once, because that horn was not a weapon. It was a promise that when it sounded, there would be no turning back. In the halls of the gods, Heimdall was neither the loudest nor the most loved, but he was respected, perhaps even feared, for reasons no one said aloud. You don't envy the man who sees everything. You don't laugh with the man who hears your soul muttering in your sleep. He was the quiet contrast to Loki's flame, the still surface to Odin's storm. There's even a tale that tells of a fierce rivalry between Heimdall and Loki, one that simmers through the Eddas like a low drumbeat. And in the end, when the world's spine cracks and Ragnarök unfolds its chaos like a long-awaited storm, it's Heimdall who sees it first, of course. He sounds the horn, and then he meets Loki one last time, and they kill each other. Not in haste, not in fury, but with the cold inevitability of 2 forces that were always meant to collide. Heimdall wasn't widely worshipped, at least not in the way Thor or Freyja were. He was more idea than idol. You didn't pray to Heimdall for blessings. You didn't ask him for rain or fertility or victory. You remembered him. You carried his image in your understanding of duty, how some roles are thankless and some watchmen never rest. He shows up in carvings, sure, in poems that speak of golden teeth and shining armor, but mostly he lived in the space between myths. He existed where boundaries formed, between worlds, between right and wrong, between beginning and end. He didn't ride a chariot of goats or command armies of the dead. He wasn't flanked by wolves or ravens, but in his presence, all things had to be clear. Heimdall could see through disguises, could hear lies before they reached your lips. Some say he had foresight, not like a prophet, but more like a man who knows where the road must go, simply because he's seen the dust rise in the distance. If he had magic, it was the quiet kind, the magic of presence, of clarity, of a man whose senses bled into the soul of the world. In our time, Heimdall lives on in stories, sometimes golden-eyed and stoic, sometimes reimagined with dark skin and godly stature, like in Marvel's telling. But no matter how he's drawn, he is always the watcher, always the one at the edge of things. You'll find him in the lonely duty of border guards, in the eyes of sentries who stare into the night, knowing no one will ever thank them for what they prevent. He represents the archetype of the guardian, not the one who fights, but the one who notices, the one who prepares, the one who holds the silence before the storm. He is the last one to sleep, the first one to rise. He holds the line between order and collapse, not with fire, but with focus. And when the end comes, and it always does, he will sound the horn, and the worlds will listen, because they know the one who watched never speaks unless it matters. That's Heimdall, the quiet certainty on the edge of myth, the god who waits. Bragi, god of poetry and eloquence. They say the sword wins the battle, but it's the song that remembers it. Long after the clang of steel fades into silence and the banners have turned to ash, it's the words, spoken, sung, whispered in the night, that linger in the bones of a people. That was Bragi's gift. Not thunder like Thor, not cunning like Loki, not even the somber weight of Odin's foresight. Bragi didn't shake the world with force. He shaped it with language. In the great halls of Asgard, he wasn't the loudest voice, but he was the one that made others listen. Not because of volume, but because every syllable carried weight, and every phrase held the quiet rhythm of meaning. His name, Bragi, likely comes from the Old Norse bregr, meaning poetry or the best. Fitting, isn't it, for a god who made language into art? But it's more than just a title. In the Norse world, where tales passed through memory like blood through veins, Bragi wasn't just a god of poetry. He was the soul of expression. He was the thread that bound deeds to memory. He was what made a man more than his sword arm, made a moment more than its violence. Bragi gave weight to words, not through magic, but through meaning. They said he was wise, and indeed, his wisdom wasn't carved from grim prophecy or battlefield scars, but from understanding, from knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. He carried no hammer, no spear, no enchanted relic, unless you count his harp or the golden tongue that never stumbled. He didn't fight with fists. He fought with verses. And if you've ever stood in a room and felt the hush fall before someone speaks, if you've ever heard words that silenced a storm within you, you've touched a sliver of what Bragi was. He was said to be the son of Odin, though there are some whispers that he was once a mortal bard, elevated by the Allfather for the purity of his craft. Truth in Norse myth is rarely clean. He was married to Idun, the keeper of the apples that kept the gods from crumbling into old age, which feels just right. The god of eloquence bound to the goddess of renewal. After all, what is poetry if not the act of keeping something alive long past its time? She gave the gods their youth. Bragi gave them their legacy. Unlike the other gods who roared through the myths with fire and storm, Bragi moves through the stories like a stream in the mountains, always there, always nourishing, but rarely noticed unless you're listening. He doesn't leap into sagas with flashy vengeance or wild schemes. Instead, he often appears when there's need for diplomacy, when tensions must be eased with the right words, when the room needs a voice that brings calm, not chaos. But don't mistake his softness for weakness. It takes strength to speak in a world of swords. It takes courage to tell the truth when lies are easier. He stood among the Aesir, not as a warrior or trickster, but as a reminder that what we say shapes what we are. And when Ragnarök comes, when the skies burn and the wolves break loose, the fate of Bragi is not written with certainty. The old poems leave his end open, as if to say that even when gods fall, the stories they've told may yet remain. Perhaps he dies like most of them. Or perhaps, like poetry itself, he survives in the voices of those who carry his words forward. Bragi was never worshipped in the way that thunder gods or sea gods might be. He had no wide temples, but he lived in the mouths of skalds, the poets of old who wandered from fire to fire, speaking sagas that outlasted stone. Every verse chanted under a snow-laden sky, every tale passed down by heart, that was a kind of worship. a silent nod to the one who taught men to capture eternity in a few measured lines. Depictions of him always return to his long beard, a symbol of age not as decay, but as wisdom earned. He was often shown with runes on his tongue, a quiet but powerful truth, because words, not weapons, were his craft. He was not bound to any beast or creature like Odin's ravens or Freyja's cats, but his familiar was the song itself, moving unseen, heard and felt, intangible and eternal. His magic, if one dares call it that, was the ability to take the fleeting and make it permanent. A moment, a death, a love, a fall from grace. Bragi could turn any of it into something that lasted, something that echoed. He doesn't stride boldly into modern pop culture like Thor or Loki, but when a character speaks truth with elegance, when a scene is remembered not for its action, but its words. That's Bragi, hiding between the lines. Some scholars say he and the concept of Bragr are inseparable. He is not just a god in myth, but a symbol of the poetic soul, the voice that reaches for beauty even when surrounded by ruin. In the quiet places of human thought, where we try to name what we feel, where we search for the rhythm that makes suffering bearable and joy unforgettable, Bragi waits. He is the part of us that tries, however clumsily, to make meaning out of being alive. And that, in the end, is no small thing. Hödur, blind god who was tricked into killing Baldr. In the long shadows cast by the gods of thunder and mischief, there lies a figure wrapped in silence and sorrow. Hödur, the blind god, the one whose hand loosed the blow that undid the joy of Asgard. He is not a god of glory, nor of triumph, but of tragedy, and perhaps that makes him more human than most. While others wielded strength, foresight, or fiery tongues, Hödur bore the burden of blindness, not just of the eyes, but of knowledge, of truth, of intention. And in that blindness, he was twisted into a weapon by another's cunning, made to carry the weight of a crime he could never have dreamed of committing. His name, Hödur, is thought to stem from an Old Norse root meaning warrior, or perhaps battle. A cruel irony, really, for a god who never sought out war, who never marched into battle willingly, and whose most infamous act was one he did not choose. He was not warlike in temperament. He was soft-spoken, reserved, set apart by his condition and by the pity of others. But perhaps his name speaks more to the battle inside, a struggle not of swords, but of guilt, of memory, of being remembered for the worst thing you've ever done. That kind of war is quieter, and it never ends. Hödur was a son of Odin, just like Baldr, the god he was tricked into killing. That made them brothers, not just in blood, but in the strange poetry of opposites. Baldr, the radiant, beloved by all, untouched by harm. Hödur, the quiet one, veiled in darkness, unknown and often overlooked. And yet it was through him, through the hand of the blind, that the golden sun was lost. Not by his will, but by Loki's manipulation. A dart of mistletoe placed in his grasp, a direction whispered, a suggestion delivered with a serpent's smoothness. Hödur could not see, and so he trusted. And in trusting, he doomed his brother, and shattered the fragile peace of the gods. He had no weapon of renown, no magical item that sung with power. The only weapon he is ever known for was the mistletoe dart, and even that was given to him. He was not feared, nor was he celebrated. He lived on the margins of the mythic stage until the day he was brought to its center for a single, devastating act. And once that act was done, he became a symbol, not of villainy, but of unintended consequence, of how tragedy can bloom from ignorance, from trust, from being used by those who understand more than we do. The gods mourned Baldr, and in their grief they turned on Hödur. Justice, in myth, is often harsh, and sometimes blind in its own way. Vali, another son of Odin, was born for a single purpose, to avenge Baldr's death by killing Hödur. And so he did. The blind god fell, punished for what his hands did, but his heart never intended. But that is not the end of him. In the prophecies of Ragnarök, when the world burns and is reborn from its ashes, it is said that both Baldr and Hödur return, together brothers once more, walking the new world not as enemies but as survivors. There is something deeply moving in that image. That forgiveness, even in myth, is possible. That even gods can be made whole again. There is little evidence that Hödur was ever worshipped widely. He had no cults, no temples, no rites in his name. But he lived in the stories, and stories have their own kind of shrine. He was remembered not for glory, but for the deep ache of remorse. He does not appear often in carvings or sagas, and when he does, he is usually in the background, silent, shrouded, like a figure waiting to be understood. No beasts are tied to him. No banners bear his sign. But in a way, that makes his presence even more haunting. He is the god of what cannot be undone, of the thing we never meant to happen. In the modern world, he rarely appears in bright colors or bold portrayals. Occasionally, he's a shadow in a comic book, a whispered reference in a game, a subplot in some twist on myth. But his essence is harder to capture, because it's not about spectacle. It's about the quiet grief we carry when we've caused harm, even without intent. It's about the need for forgiveness, and the slow, painful road toward it. He has no other names that have survived in legend, but his story is a mirror. In him, we see the part of ourselves that errs unknowingly, the part that wounds without meaning to, the part that lives afterward with the ache of consequence. Hjördur is the god of unintended harm, of guilt worn without malice, of the sorrow that lingers when apology is not enough. And in that way, he is perhaps not just a tragic figure, but a deeply human one. We all carry a bit of his story within us. The question then is whether we, like he and Baldr, can one day walk together again in peace, in some future we have yet to build. Vidar, god of vengeance and silence. There's a kind of power that doesn't shout, that doesn't boast or rage or laugh in halls full of song. It's the kind that waits, the kind that watches, that lives in the quiet woods just outside the reach of firelight. Vidar is that kind of god. He doesn't speak much, not because he lacks thought, but because he understands the weight of silence. In Norse myth, where gods often burn hot and bright, roaring with fury, dancing with mischief, weaving spells and schemes, Vidar is different. He is the stillness before the storm, the patience between injustice and judgment. And when he finally moves, it is with purpose so clear and so final, it carves itself into the bones of the world. His name, in Old Norse, is thought to mean something like wide ruler or forest warrior. And the old tales say that's where he lives, far from the walls of Asgard, in a silent hall surrounded by deep-growing trees, untouched and wild. It's fitting. For Vidar is a creature of the edges, born of both order and the raw power of the unknown. He is the son of Odin, the all-seeing father of gods, and Gridr, a Jotun woman whose name carries the sting of vehemence and might. From his father, Vidar inherited a quiet, unbreakable resolve. From his mother, the primal strength of the earth. He doesn't wield that strength idly. He carries it like a stone within him, quiet, solid, immovable. He is not a god of many myths. You won't find him at the center of a dozen tales or riddles. But the one story he inhabits, he defines it. When Ragnarök comes, and the world cracks and bleeds, it is Vidar who avenges Odin, not Thor, not Baldr. Vidar. When the great wolf Fenrir swallows the Allfather whole, it is this silent son who steps forward. He wears a boot crafted from all the scraps of leather ever discarded by humankind, and with it, he plants his foot on the lower jaw of the beast. With hands steady as mountains, he seizes Fenrir's upper jaw and tears the wolf apart. No spell, no trick, no weapon of flame, just raw, patient, earned strength. It's not just vengeance, it's justice. The kind that takes time. The kind that waits for the right moment and then moves with certainty. He survives the end of the world. When the fires die down, when the sea pulls back and the ash settles on the soil, Vidar stands among the few left breathing. He walks into the new world not as a conqueror, but as a witness. He remembers what was lost. He carries the memory of Odin, of the fire, of the fall. And still, he says nothing. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he understands that some truths sit better in the heart than they do on the tongue. In carvings and poems, he's not always easy to spot, often shown with that thick-soled boot, or facing off against Fenrir in a grim moment of purpose. There are no great animal companions linked to him, no ravens or wolves to flank his path. His companion is silence. His realm is stillness. He is the god of quiet strength, of loyalty so deep it lives beneath words. There is no great cult to his name, no burning incense in temple halls, but those who understood what it meant to endure, to stay steady through pain and storm, they would have known Vidar. They would have nodded to the trees, to the stillness in the forest, and felt something near to reverence. He doesn't shape-shift or raise the dead. He doesn't need to. His power is older than spectacle. It is the kind of power that comes from knowing who you are and what you must do. The kind that doesn't need to convince others, because it's already rooted in something unshakable. In the stories we tell ourselves, even now, there's always a figure like Vidar, the quiet protector, the one who waits while others rage, the one who acts only when it matters most. In that way, he still lives, even now, in stories, in games, sometimes in the background of comic books or shows. A figure standing still while the world burns around him, waiting for the moment to act. Vidar is more than vengeance. He's what vengeance becomes when it is tempered by patience, when it is driven not by hate, but by duty. He represents the quiet courage of those who carry their grief like armor, who speak only when the words will change everything. He is the silence that follows pain, the pause before justice. And in that pause, in that calm before the storm, you can hear him, if you listen. Vali, god of revenge. There are some souls that aren't born so much as summoned, called forth not by love or longing, but by necessity, by the raw, cutting wound of injustice. Vali is one of those souls. He came into the world not like most do, with time to learn, to stumble, to grow. No. His birth was swift, his purpose even swifter. The gods needed a hand to carry out vengeance. And so Odin, the Allfather, reached for the giantess Rindr, not with tenderness, but with a chilling sense of destiny. And from that union came Vali. His name in Old Norse speaks to this very role. It means something like the chosen one, or the hidden one. As if fate had been holding him back, waiting for just the right moment. And when Baldr, the most beloved of all the gods, fell by his brother's blind hand, that moment came. The sagas tell us that Vali grew to manhood in the span of a single day. Imagine that. A boy becoming a god before the sun had time to set. His childhood was not one of games or laughter. It was a forge, a crucible. And by nightfall, he had done what no one else dared. He took vengeance. Hoder, the blind god tricked by Loki into killing Baldr, met his end at Vali's hands. Not out of cruelty, but because the laws of fate in Norse myth are unyielding. There are debts that must be paid, and Vali was made to be the collector. That's what he is, a god of vengeance, of righteous retribution, not out of rage or chaos, but because sometimes balance demands blood. He doesn't appear often in the old stories. His tale is brief, sharp, and final, like the strike of a blade. But his presence is heavy. In the great tapestry of Norse myth, he's a thread woven in darkness, yet glinting with purpose. He doesn't carry a named weapon, at least not one passed down through stories. He doesn't have a thunderous hammer or a world-ending spear. What he carries is far more elemental, a strength that doesn't need ornament, a role that doesn't ask for applause. He is the judgment that follows a crime, the hand that acts when all others hesitate. Born of Odin and Rindr, Vali is a half-brother to gods like Thor and Baldr. But his connection to Baldr is deeper than blood. It's carved in fate. He exists because of Baldr's death, lives in the shadow of that tragedy, and yet steps out of it with his own sense of clarity. His relationship with the other gods is not full of feasts or shared stories, but of duty. He was made to serve a single moment, and in that moment he became unforgettable. When Ragnarök comes, and the skies fall and fire eats the edges of the world, Vali survives, one of the few. Like his brother Vidar, he endures the storm, and when the dust settles and the gods lie dead, he remains. He is not the loud voice leading the charge, nor the cunning one pulling strings behind the scenes. He's the one who stands, simply, with purpose intact, a quiet witness to the rebirth of a world that tore itself apart. In that way, Vali becomes something more than vengeance. He becomes the seed of continuation, the reminder that from even the bloodiest acts, something new can rise. He wasn't widely worshipped, not in the way Thor or Freyja were. There are no great temples etched with his likeness, no chants that echo his name across valleys. But those who understood the cold weight of justice, who had seen wrongs that cried out for reckoning, they might have whispered his name. Not in prayer, perhaps, but in grim acknowledgement. In the lonely moments after loss, when someone's taken from you and the world turns silent and heavy, that's where Vali lives. The old carvings and sagas don't describe him in much detail, and perhaps that's fitting. He isn't meant to be decorated in gold or heralded with song. He's meant to be felt, like a storm just beneath the surface. An unspoken promise that justice, though it may sleep, never forgets. He's not tied to animals like Odin's ravens or Freyja's cats. If anything, he belongs to the hawk that waits motionless in a tree, or the wolf that watches from the dark, eyes reflecting only the moment of the strike. He doesn't shapeshift. He doesn't cast illusions. He doesn't need to. His magic is in his singularity, in the terrifying, beautiful clarity of purpose. He stands as a mirror to our own darker truths, that sometimes vengeance isn't cruel, but necessary. That sometimes the world has to break before it can heal. In modern times, you won't often see him in the spotlight, but now and then, in video games, in whispered dialogue or the background of a myth-inspired tale, his figure appears. Unyielding, quiet, watching. He's the embodiment of swift justice. Not the sprawling legal system, not the poetic words of philosophy, but the immediate reckoning of a wrong too great to be ignored. In human terms, he's the side of us that rises when someone we love has been hurt, the part that wants to make things right not tomorrow, but now. And though that side can be dangerous, it also holds a kind of purity. Vali reminds us that there is power in devotion, in action, in standing for something when the world has fallen to pieces. He is the god of that sharp, clear moment where grief becomes resolve. And in that, he still walks among us. Forseti, god of justice and mediation. Some deities roar like thunder, others whisper like the wind through ancient trees. And then there are those rare ones who speak with calm that settles deep into your bones, not because they lack power, but because they have nothing to prove. Forseti is one of those gods. In a pantheon of warriors, tricksters, and doom-bringers, he stands apart, not with a sword in hand, but with silence in the hall and balance in his voice. His name, in Old Norse, carries the weight of the presiding one, the one who sits, who listens, who settles what others cannot. In a world shaped by chaos and fate, he became the still point in a spinning wheel, the god of justice and mediation, born not of violence, but as a response to it. He is the son of Baldr, the shining god whose death brought sorrow to all 9 realms, and of Nanna, whose grief was so great it led her to die of heartbreak. So it stands to reason that their child would be one born of gentler tides. But don't mistake gentleness for weakness. Forseti carries with him a kind of strength that isn't seen on the battlefield, but in the rooms where disputes are laid bare, and truths, uncomfortable, tangled, but necessary, must be faced. He presides over Glitnir, a radiant hall with silver pillars and a roof of gold. That place is not a throne room, but a court. Not a monument to power, but to reason. It's said that no one who comes before Forseti ever leaves with their grievances unresolved. In a world where so many gods act with impulse and pride, he listens, he weighs, he decides. Forseti doesn't stride into sagas with the thunder of Thor or the cunning of Loki. His stories are few and far between, not because he is unimportant, but because justice, real justice, is rarely loud. It works best in quiet moments, behind closed doors, away from the gaze of spectacle. Yet his role is critical, the very glue that holds together the fraying edges of divine society. If Odin sought knowledge and Thor upheld strength, then Forseti was the one who kept those ideals from tipping into tyranny. He is wise, yes, but not in the way of riddles or runes. His wisdom is patient, reflective, and humane. And in a culture steeped in vengeance, his very existence is a rebuttal. He doesn't fight to destroy, he speaks to heal. No weapon is tied to him, because force was never his domain. Instead, his tool is truth, and his gift is understanding. One might say his voice itself holds power. the ability to quiet rage, to untangle motives, to see past anger into what truly drives conflict. His influence on the other gods is subtle, but enduring. He doesn't challenge their authority, he doesn't provoke. But when their decisions run too hot, too cold, or too far, Forseti is the one who helps bring them back to center. He's not known to have children or lovers that the myths speak of, nor does he chase glory through conquest. His victories are quieter, measured in reconciliations, in wrongs made right. Strangely enough, when Ragnarök draws its final breath and fire licks the sky, the sagas fall quiet on Forseti's fate. Some say he survives, and it's fitting. A god of peace, of arbitration. What place does he have on a battlefield where prophecy rules and blades decide destinies? And yet, if the world is to be reborn, to start again with something wiser than before, then surely it needs a god like him to show the way. Perhaps that's why he remains, not for the end, but for what comes after. A symbol not of destruction, but of repair. Unlike Thor with his temples or Freyr with his sacred groves, Forseti never had a wide cult of worship. He was honored, it seems, more in the values people held than in the altars they built. Among the Frisians, a Germanic people living along the North Sea, he was known and respected, not through grand ritual, but through law, through councils, through customs of fairness. His temple was in the act of sitting down and finding a way forward without bloodshed. That's no small thing, especially in a time where strength was measured by who stood last on the battlefield. He doesn't appear often in carvings or grand statues, and perhaps that's why he remains a quieter presence in our modern minds. He's not a pop culture icon like Loki, or a hammer-slinging figure like Thor, but every time a character steps between two warring sides, every time a story pauses the fight to ask, what is just? Forseti is there, in spirit. Sometimes, the gods we need most are not the loudest. They're the ones who remind us that justice is not vengeance, and peace is not weakness. Forseti, then, isn't just a figure in old myths. He's an archetype, the inner part of us that longs for fairness, not favor. That speaks not to dominate, but to understand. In a world that often prizes the winner, he represents the mediator, the one who ensures that even the least among us is heard. He reminds us that justice isn't about power, it's about balance, and in that balance, he finds his strength. Njord, god of the sea, wind, fishing, and wealth. Njord is not the kind of god who stands above with thunder in his hands or fury in his eyes. He is the god of wind, sea, and the quiet, steady wealth that comes from knowing the tides and trusting the horizon. His name, Njordur in Old Norse, whispers of ancient roots, perhaps even older than the Aesir themselves, a name that hums with the salt of the sea and the hush of the waves. It carries the echo of something pre-Viking, something deep in the soul of the coastal peoples, a force not just of the ocean's danger, but of its abundance. Njord is not a god who conquers, but a god who provides food, peace, trade, and the good fortune of favorable winds. His name, much like the sea he governs, offers no sharp answers but carries the feeling of something vast and necessary. He holds sway over things that do not shout for attention, but quietly sustain life. The sea that yields fish to feed hungry mouths, the wind that fills sails and carries merchants to distant harbors, and the wealth that trickles in from trade not stolen with swords, but earned through exchange. His domain is gentler than most, but not without power. The sea can be a friend or a grave, and Njord knows both sides of that story. He is not a warrior like Thor, nor a schemer like Loki, but he is indispensable all the same. For when you've lost your way on the open water, when your nets have come up empty for days, it is Njord you call on. And sometimes, if the wind shifts just right, he answers. Njord is described as wise, generous, and calm, a steady voice in a pantheon often driven by chaos and violence. He is the father who doesn't raise his voice unless he must, the kind who knows that storms don't need shouting to announce themselves. He is patient, but not passive. There is a quiet authority in him, the kind that comes from experience and enduring. And yet, even gods like him are not immune to the tangled threads of love and fate. His story with Skadi, the giantess of the mountains, is one of the more curious pairings in Norse myth. She wanted to marry a god, but chose one by looking only at his feet, hoping to find Baldr. Instead, she found Njord. They tried to live together, but Skadi loved the cold heights, and Njord longed for the shore. After a while, they split their days, some in the mountains, some by the sea, but it was never enough. The marriage, like many human ones, could not survive the pull of two different worlds. It didn't end in hate, it just ended. He doesn't carry weapons in the way that others do. No hammers, no spears. Njord doesn't need to fight for his domain. His strength lies in presence, in the tides that always return, in the breeze that knows where to go. The sea doesn't ask for permission, it simply is. That's Njord. His symbols are the ships that pass safely into harbor, the oars that cut through water, the seabirds that follow the scent of fish, and perhaps, in the sound of waves against a dock at twilight, you can hear his breath. His children are famous in their own right. He is the father of Freyr and Freya, gods of fertility, beauty, and prosperity, born of an earlier union with his unnamed sister, a tradition from the older Vanir gods, whose customs predate the more structured Aesir ways. Freyr, like his father, is associated with peace and abundance, while Freya brings passion and mystery to the world. Njord is their anchor. While they chase joy and war and love, he remains where the sea meets the shore, keeping the balance. His story is quieter than most. He was part of the great truce between the Aesir and Vanir, when war between the gods ended not in bloodshed, but in exchange. Njord, along with his children, went to live among the Aesir, symbolizing a moment when wisdom won out over violence. It is said he found a place among them, though perhaps he always longed for the softer winds of his homeland. His presence is felt more in the world than in the tales, and that might be the greatest story of all. A god who lets his work speak louder than his words. In the final battle, in the twilight of the gods, Njord's fate is uncertain. Some say he returns to the Vanir, to his people, before Ragnarök begins. Others say he survives. After all, the sea does not burn easily. And when the world ends in fire, it is the waters that rise in the end. Njord may be waiting in that deep silence, to begin again when the flames die out. People once gave thanks to him not with spectacle, but with reverence. Fishermen and traders left offerings by the shore, hoping for safe passage or a bountiful catch. He was worshipped in coastal places, where life depended on the sea's favor. There were no high temples carved in his name, but the wind at your back and the fish in your net were signs that Njord was near. That kind of worship isn't about fear, it's about gratitude. He is depicted as a noble man, calm and strong, his eyes full of distant thoughts. Not ageless in the way of marble statues, but seasoned like driftwood, shaped by time, worn by the wind and still standing. His familiars are the creatures of the shoreline, seabirds, seals, maybe even the great whales that sing through the deep. They are not his servants, but his companions, moving with him through a world always in motion. He may not hurl lightning or change form with every breath, but Njord commands the forces that shape continents over time. He calms the storms. He breathes life into the sails. He knows the paths the fish will take long before the nets are cast. His magic is the kind that looks like luck until you realize it's something deeper, a rhythm written into the world itself. In modern times, he's not as loud in the stories as Thor or Loki, but he lingers. In video games that speak of Norse lands and seafaring gods, he appears, sometimes only in name, sometimes in spirit. He's the calm before the storm, the voice in a sailor's prayer, the feeling you get when the waves rock gently under a wooden hull and all the world is water and sky. He is not known by many names, but the ones he has are old and powerful. Njord is enough, because he represents something every human understands deep down, the desire for peace, for stability, for the wealth that doesn't glitter but lasts. He is the archetype of the provider, the steward of the boundary between chaos and home. In the human heart, he is the yearning for safe harbor and the quiet strength to return to sea when the time is right. And in that, perhaps, we see ourselves, not as warriors or kings, but as people trying to live well, with the wind in our favor and the sea at our side. Freya, goddess of love, beauty, fertility, war, and cider. Freya is the kind of goddess who makes you pause, not because she demands it, but because there's something in her presence that silences even the loudest rooms. Her name, from the Old Norse Freya, simply means lady. And like many truths in myth, the simplicity hides something far deeper. She's not just a figure of myth. She is a force of the human condition itself. Love, beauty, desire, war, death, magic, things we chase, things we fear, things we carry inside whether we want to or not. She doesn't sit quietly in one corner of the world, like a patron of just one thing. Freya is the tension between life and death, between longing and loss, and that's what makes her unforgettable. Her name may seem gentle on the surface, but its weight is that of a storm hidden behind calm waters. They say she rides a chariot pulled by cats, and that alone tells you she isn't like the others. Cats, creatures both domesticated and untamed, soft yet deadly, playful but unknowable, are her companions not for their cuteness, but for what they are beneath the surface, just like her. Her domains are as vast as they are contradictory. She is the goddess of love and beauty, yes, but also of war and death. She is fertility in the fields and blood on the battlefield. That's not confusion, that's balance. She rules over cedar, the ancient Norse magic of shaping fate, a magic even Odin learned from her, which says more than words ever could. When Freya practices cedar, she's not just casting spells, she's pulling the hidden threads of destiny, bending time, touching futures, and whispering to the past. She knows the secret paths that even gods fear to walk. She isn't gentle in the way that makes people feel safe. She's gentle in the way that demands honesty. She's wise, but not above letting passion take her by the hand. She's seductive, but it's never only physical. When Freya desires something, or someone, she brings a presence that leaves no room for lies. She can be terrifying too, not in a monstrous way, but in the way that truth can shake the ground under your feet. To look at her is to see every love you ever lost, and every war you ever fought to hold on to it. She carries no hammer, no spear, but she possesses a necklace, Brisingamen, forged by dwarves with hands skilled enough to tempt gods. It glows with a power that's not just physical beauty, but irresistible charm and spiritual gravity. Some say it holds the stars in place, others say it binds fates together. Either way, it isn't just jewelry, it's part of her essence. She is the daughter of Njord, god of the sea, and an unnamed sister of his, a remnant of Vanir customs, where bloodlines twist into circles rather than clean trees. Her twin brother is Freyr, god of peace and prosperity, and though they share a bond born of balance, she is more storm than sunshine. Her lover is Odin, a shadowed figure who disappears from the myths like mist in the morning sun. He vanishes on long wanderings, and in his absence, Freya weeps tears of red gold, an image that has stayed in the minds of storytellers for centuries. Some say Odin is Odin in disguise. Others say he is a separate being entirely, a spirit always just out of reach. Whatever the truth, it doesn't matter. Her grief speaks to something eternal, the pain of losing what you love most, and the beauty in still remembering. The stories told of Freya are layered, tangled like seaweed in the tide. In one tale, the giants demand her as a bride in exchange for building a wall around Asgard, thinking her beauty worth the cost of labor and stone. The gods refuse, of course, but the tale reveals something essential. Freya is desired, always desired, and rarely understood. In another myth, Loki accuses her of sleeping with every god and elf alike, a bitter insult meant to wound. But she does not deny her passions, nor does she retreat in shame. Freya doesn't apologize for wanting, for feeling, for being fully alive. In that, she holds up a mirror to humanity in all its raw complexity. Among the gods, Freya is both ally and enigma. She walks among the Aesir but is of the Vanir, a living reminder of a war that once divided the divine. She is respected, feared, sometimes resented, often loved. Odin seeks her wisdom, for she sees what he cannot. Loki mocks her because he knows she threatens the fragile order with her unfiltered truth. Thor fights beside her in silence, for they both understand that power isn't always in muscle. It can also lie in resolve. In battle, Freya claims the dead. Half of those who fall in war do not go to Odin's Hall of Valhalla, but to her realm, Folkvanger. There, she welcomes them not as trophies, but as companions. She doesn't take the strongest, she takes the worthy. In Ragnarök, the end of all things, Her fate is cloaked in silence. The myths do not tell us if she survives, but something about her feels eternal. Love and war, beauty and magic. These do not vanish when the world burns. They rise again with the ashes. Maybe Freya does too, not as a survivor, but as a rebirth. Her worship was widespread, especially among those who depended on life's unpredictable cycles. Farmers, lovers, warriors, and women. She was not a distant deity, but one called upon in the quiet of night, in childbirth, in longing, in revenge. Her name lived in temples, in field offerings, in whispered prayers. In Sweden, where the earth and sky seem always to murmur of the old gods, her name still clings to the land. Depictions of her vary, sometimes clothed in fine garments, sometimes wild-haired and unbothered by modesty, but always glowing with a kind of inner fire. Her eyes were said to shine like amber, her tears gold, her spirit untamed. Cats follow her not out of obedience, but respect. Hawks are sacred to her as well, and she has a cloak of feathers that lets her soar over the 9 worlds like thought itself. Her magic is not for show. She can shift shapes, speak with the dead, pierce illusions, and alter fate. Satyr, in her hands, is not a trick. It's a language the universe responds to. In modern times, Freya has re-emerged, often misunderstood, but always magnetic. She appears in novels, video games, comics, sometimes as a fierce warrior, sometimes as a sensual figure, often both. But no matter the medium, the core remains. She is the fire that doesn't burn out. She goes by many names: Mardul, Hern, Geffen, Seer, each one reflecting a different aspect of her being, like the many faces of the moon. Freya is not just a goddess of love, not just a goddess of war, not just a weaver of fate. She is the fullness of being human, the beauty that makes us ache, the magic that pulls us forward, the grief that won't let go, the strength to survive it. She's the one who reminds us that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that sometimes, the most sacred thing a person can do is simply feel. Deeply. Truly. Without shame. Freyr, god of peace. There is a kind of quiet strength in Freyr that doesn't demand attention, but earns it all the same. Where other gods shout across the heavens with thunder and flame, Freyr is the rustling of golden fields before harvest, the hush of a warm breeze that makes the trees sigh in relief after a storm. His name, in Old Norse, simply means Lord, a title that sounds simple, but in truth is rich with dignity, a title not given, but lived into. Freyr was never the kind of god to conquer by force. He ruled by harmony, by giving life rather than taking it. In a world built on blood and steel, where even the gods often spoke through violence, Freyr stood for something gentler: peace, fertility, prosperity, the sacred rhythm of sun and rain, of planting and reaping. He was the twin brother of Freya, and together they form a kind of mirror, a divine balance between the feminine and the masculine aspects of creation and longing. If she is the fire of passion, he is the earth that steadies it. They are the children of Njord, god of the sea, born of the Vanir, that ancient tribe of gods that stood apart from the Aesir who would later come to dominate the myths. When the war between the Vanir and the Aesir finally came to a quiet end, Freyr was sent to Asgard as part of the peace agreement, and peace followed him like a shadow. Not because he was weak, but because he understood what it cost to lose it. He became the god of good harvests, of calm weather, of fruitful unions and thriving lands. In a time and place where winters could starve a village, where a single storm could mean the difference between survival and ruin, Freyr was more than worshipped. He was depended upon. He was not a warrior by nature, but he had his weapons all the same. Among them, a ship called Skidbladnir, crafted so perfectly it could fold up and fit in one's pocket, yet always find a fair wind when opened on the sea. And most famously, he possessed a sword, one that could fight entirely on its own, slashing through foes, with no hand to guide it. That sword was a symbol of both power and restraint, a tool of defense rather than conquest. But in time, he would give it up. He gave it away for love, a choice that echoes down through the sagas not with judgment, but with understanding. Because Freyr, for all his divine stature, felt deeply. When he saw the giantess Gerda in Jotunheim, something in him stirred. Not just desire, but the aching certainty that he could not live without her. He sent his servant Skirnir to win her heart, offering gold and promises and, eventually, threats. The story is not romantic in the modern sense. It is complex, tinged with coercion, shadowed by desperation. But what matters is that Freyr gave up his greatest protection, his sword, for the chance at connection. He chose love, with all its risks, over power. Freyr was not a solitary god. He was close to his family, bound tightly to Freya, and respected by the Aesir who welcomed him into their fold. There are few tales of rivalry or bitterness around him. Even Loki, who mocks everyone without fear or favor, speaks less harshly of Freyr than of most.
Perhaps it is because Freyr really raised his voice, and when he did, it was within the weight of stillness behind it, in the halls of the gods. He was not the oldest, but he was.
He dies not because he is weak, but because he made a choice long ago to embrace something more human than divine. He chose to love rather than to prepare for war. And in that way, his death is not just tragic, it's deeply human. Among mortals, Freyr was cherished. In Uppsala, one of the most important religious centers in ancient Sweden, temples were raised to him. His name was spoken in springtime, his image carved into wood and stone, his spirit invited into fields and bedrooms alike. He was called upon in weddings and in planting. His blessings asked for children and crops. To worship Freyr was to believe in the goodness of life, even when it was hard. It was to believe that peace was possible, even when the world bent toward war. In appearance, he was often described as radiant, golden, handsome beyond words. Not with the hard edges of a warrior, but with the glow of someone who gives rather than takes. Boars were sacred to him, strong, fertile creatures tied to both war and harvest. His golden-bristled boar, Gullinbursti, could run faster than any horse, its body shining like the morning sun. It was built by dwarves, like many of the gods' greatest treasures, and it followed him not just into battle, but into celebration. Freyr's magic was less about spectacle and more about essence. He didn't raise the dead or read the stars. He changed the weather. He made seeds sprout. He turned barren fields into bread. His power was not flashy, but it fed generations. In the modern world, Freyr appears now and then, mostly in the shadows of pop culture. Sometimes renamed, sometimes miscast as merely a fertility figure. But beneath the surface, he lingers in stories of selfless love, in characters who choose harmony over revenge, in the quiet strength of those who build rather than destroy. His archetype, the nurturing ruler, the peacemaker, the beloved giver of life, still echoes in our understanding of what it means to lead without force. Freyr may not have had the storms of Thor or the riddles of Odin. He did not shake the earth or steal the fire, but he mattered. He mattered in the quiet moments, in the turning of the seasons, in the small and sacred act of choosing connection over domination. And perhaps that's what makes him so powerful. Not the sword he gave away, but the reason he gave it. That's a kind of courage we don't always recognize, but we should. Because in a world so often driven by noise and fire, it's the ones who choose to build the harvest who remind us how life endures. Loki, trickster god of mischief. Now, if you've ever wondered what happens when a god doesn't quite belong but is far too clever to be cast out, then you're already beginning to understand Loki. His name, tangled in the roots of Old Norse, likely means something like knot or tangle, and that couldn't be more fitting, because Loki is the snarl in the thread of fate, the one who pulls and tightens until things snap or unravel. He's not easily explained, not easily loved, and certainly not easily ignored. In the old tales, Loki doesn't stand neatly in the light or the dark. He walks the line in between, smirking all the while, rearranging the rules just to see what will happen when they fall apart. Loki is the god of mischief, yes, but mischief is too soft a word for what he does. Chaos is closer. He is shapeshifter, schemer, silver-tongued architect of mayhem, the one who can talk his way into or out of anything or anyone. He has turned into a mare and birthed a horse. He's become a fly, a fish, an old woman, even fire itself. He is as fluid as smoke and just as difficult to hold. His magic isn't about power in the traditional sense. It's not a hammer smashing through mountains or a spear flung across the stars. It's in the twist of a phrase, the perfectly timed lie, the secret passage that only opens when you laugh at the impossible. He carries no legendary weapon, no grand totem, because his true power lies in what he can become, and who he can convince others to be. His family tree, like everything about him, refuses to sit still. Son of the Jotun Farbauti and the elusive Laufey, Loki is not quite god and not quite giant, but something restless and in between. He's blood brother to Odin, not by birth, but by oath, and that bond runs deep, even when it turns to poison. His lovers span worlds, from the gentle Sigyn, who stays beside him through his darkest punishments, to the giantess Angerboda, who bore him monstrous children, Fenrir the wolf, Jörmungandr the world serpent, and Hel, queen of the underworld. These are not the children of heroes. They are omens wrapped in flesh, each destined to play a role in the breaking of the world. And yet, Loki loves them in his own way. The stories never show him ashamed of them. Perhaps because deep down, he knows what it means to be born wrong in a world that fears what it cannot control. He shows up again and again in the old myths, sometimes helping the gods, sometimes ruining them. He tricks the dwarves into making Mjolnir for Thor. He cuts off Sif's hair and then replaces it with golden strands spun like sunlight. He gets Thor into trouble and sometimes with even more effort gets him back out. But the laughter he brings always comes with a price, and over time the gods grow weary of paying it. The turning point comes with the death of Baldr, the beloved, whose only weakness was mistletoe. Loki finds it, crafts the weapon, and guides the blind god Hodr to throw it. Baldr falls, and with him, the fragile piece of Asgard. That's when they see him not as a clever companion, but as a threat. That's when the mask slips, and behind it, the gods find not just laughter, but betrayal. They bind him, deep underground, with the entrails of his own son. They place a serpent above him, dripping venom onto his face, and only Sigyn's loyalty shields him from the pain. There he lies, until the end of all things, and there he waits. Because Loki has a role to play in Ragnarök, and it's not a small one. When the final battle begins, he breaks free and leads the enemies of the gods against them. He sails the ship Naglfar, made from the fingernails of the dead, and meets Heimdall on the field of chaos. The two strike each other down, and in that moment, mischief meets order, and both are silenced. It's fitting, in a way. Loki dies not as a villain, but as a necessary part of the story's end. Unlike the other gods, Loki was never widely worshipped in temples or rites. He was feared, laughed at, whispered about, but rarely called upon. People respected him the way you respect fire, beautiful, essential, and dangerous if you get too close. There were no shrines in his name, no prayers carved in stone. But he was remembered. You see, people have always known that life isn't clean, that sometimes you need the one who breaks the rules to reveal how fragile those rules really are. And that's what Loki is, not a devil, not a hero, but the question that refuses to be answered. He's often pictured as handsome, with sharp eyes and sharper thoughts, a grin that promises trouble, and hands that never stay still. In carvings and poetry, he is change itself, sometimes standing among the gods, and other times behind their enemies. He is associated with fire, not just as an element, but as a force. Bright, consuming, unpredictable. And in his children, we see echoes of him. The serpent that encircles the world. The wolf that cannot be bound forever. The goddess who rules the dead not with cruelty, but with inevitability. They are not evil. They are truths dressed as monsters, and Loki is the one who brought them into being. His influence stretches into our stories even now. He shows up in modern myths, in movies and comics and games, most famously wearing a green cloak and a mocking smile. But beyond the costume, he still stands for the same things: the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who breaks things so something new can grow. In psychology, he is the archetype of chaos, the necessary foil to order, the spark that disrupts stagnation. He reminds us that control is often an illusion, and that laughter can be a weapon sharper than any blade. Loki is not comfortable, he is not safe, but he is honest in his own way. Honest about how messy the world is. Honest about how thin the line is between friend and foe, between help and harm. He is the god who reminds us that nothing stays the same, and sometimes the only way to move forward is to let it all burn and start again. And maybe, in the ashes, we'll find something worth saving. Hel, ruler of the realm of the dead. If you were to travel far enough through the 9 realms, past the lands of light and warmth, down through the cold places where breath comes slow and shadows stretch long, you might find yourself standing before the gates of Hel. Not just a realm, but a name that carries the weight of finality. Hel, the daughter of Loki, born not from the joy of creation, but from the world's deeper, darker truths. Those parts most people choose to look away from. Her name, in Old Norse, simply means hidden or concealed, which speaks to more than just location. It speaks to what most of us try not to think about. What comes after the last breath, the final silence, the slow unraveling of memory and body. Hel rules over the dead, not the glorious dead who fall in battle and are taken to Valhalla, but the others, the ordinary ones, the forgotten ones, those who died of age, illness, or sorrow. She doesn't beckon them. She doesn't chase them. She waits, because she knows they'll come. That's her realm, and her domain is as still as the grave and as vast as the generations that have passed. She is not a goddess of cruelty or punishment. She is not a tormentor. She is simply the keeper of those who are no longer part of the living story. And that kind of role demands a stillness, a quiet authority that doesn't scream, but simply is. Her powers are not about destruction or dominance. She holds no weapon, wields no thunder or spear. Instead, her strength is the unchanging nature of death itself. She guards the boundary no one returns from. And if the gods are forces of nature, storm, wisdom, war, then Hel is inevitability. No sword cuts through it, no bargain undoes it. It is her calm, unwavering hold that keeps the world in balance, even when everything else falls apart. Born of Loki and the giantess Angerboda, Hel is sister to Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to kill Odin, and Jormungandr, the serpent who encircles the world. This is a family that frightens even the gods, not because they are evil, but because they are truths made flesh. Each child of Loki embodies something the gods can't control. And Hel, though she does not roar or strike, may be the most unsettling of all. She doesn't challenge you to fight. She reminds you that your time will run out whether you lift a sword or not. She doesn't chase glory. She waits behind the curtain, always. The old stories don't speak of her often, but when they do, there's a quiet respect there. It was Odin who cast her into the underworld, giving her dominion over those who did not die in battle. And she took it with the dignity of someone who knew her purpose, even before it was spoken. In the tale of Baldr's death, she holds the line. Even as the gods beg her to return their shining sun, she stands firm. All things must die, she says, and all things must stay dead. There is a grim fairness in her judgment, the kind of justice that doesn't sway to emotion. When she refuses to return Baldr, it isn't out of malice, it's out of principle. She upholds the rules no one else wants to speak aloud. There are no temples to Hel, no crowds singing her name, no golden statues raised in her image. Worship was never about praise with her. It was acknowledgement. In the old days, people carved runes and whispered her name over the bodies of the dead, not out of love, but out of understanding. Because every person who has ever lived has walked toward her in the end, whether they knew her name or not. She is not warm, not cruel. She is necessity. Descriptions of Hel paint a haunting image, half of her face beautiful and alive, the other half pallid, dead, decayed, a reflection of what she is and what she rules. She is the threshold personified, between breath and silence, between flesh and bone. And while she does not walk with beasts at her heels like Odin's as wolves or Freya as cats, she is often associated with dogs of the underworld and the constant presence of decay, stillness, and winter. Her magic is not like that of the gods above. She does not shapeshift or throw lightning, but she does not need to. She holds the line between life and death, and none may cross it without her leave. That, in its own quiet way, is a power greater than any fire or storm. In modern times, Hel makes her way into stories again, sometimes reimagined as a villain, sometimes as a cold monarch of the dead. But often, what's lost in these retellings is the nuance of what she truly represents. In psychology, she is not fear of death, but the truth of it. She is what we suppress, what we cannot escape. She reminds us that the story doesn't always end with fireworks. Sometimes it ends with silence, and a gate that slowly closes behind us. She is not chaos like her father, nor strength like her monstrous brother, nor fury like the serpent that coils beneath the sea. She is the still moment after the battle, the long pause before the song fades out. She is the truth you carry in your bones whether you know it or not. And though few call her name, all will know her one day. In the end, that is her gift, and her burden. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent. There are stories, deep ones, that whisper of a serpent so vast it encircles the very world, not in metaphor or exaggeration, but in cold, bone-deep reality. They called him Jörmungandr, which in Old Norse means something like huge monster or great beast. But the name holds more than size. It speaks of something ancient and coiled, something that exists not just on the borders of the earth, but in the space between control and chaos. He is known as the Midgard Serpent, and he is not a god in the way we think of gods, not a figure who rules or reigns, but a force. Primordial, inevitable, and bound in prophecy from the moment he first drew breath. Born of Loki and the giantess Angerboda, Jörmungandr is one of 3 children the gods feared immediately upon their arrival. His sister was Hel, who rules the dead, and his brother was Fenrir, the wolf fated to devour the world's brightest light. When Odin saw the serpent, he did not hesitate. He hurled the creature into the sea, perhaps hoping to forget him, perhaps hoping to delay what he sensed would one day come. But the sea did not destroy Jörmungandr. It made him. There, beneath the waves, he grew until he wrapped himself entirely around the world and bit down on his own tail. And so he became a circle, a boundary, a loop of fate that never broke. He became not just a monster, but a mirror of time itself. He holds no weapon in hand, because he is the weapon. His coils are storms. His breath is poison. His very presence is a challenge to the ordered world the gods try so hard to maintain. Jörmungandr is no trickster, no wanderer, no wise speaker. He is vast, silent, patient. His presence is a kind of pressure in the bones, a reminder that no matter how high the gods build their halls, the sea always waits below, and in its darkest places, there are things they cannot tame. There are few tales that tell his voice, because he is not a storyteller. He is a story. But when he does rise from the depths, the world listens. In one tale, Thor, the god of thunder and storm, sails out disguised as a fisherman. There, with an ox's head as bait, he hooks Jörmungandr and wrestles with him. For a moment, the 2 titans meet, strength against strength, fate straining at the edges. Thor lifts his hammer. The serpent rises, venom dripping from his fangs. But before the blow can land, the terrified companion in the boat cuts the line, and the serpent sinks again into the dark. That's how their story always went, unfinished, inevitable. Because both knew this was not the end. Their true meeting would come at Ragnarök. And when that day arrives, when the sky splits and the sea boils, Jörmungandr will rise once more, not as a secret beneath the ocean, but as the herald of endings. He and Thor will meet again, not in pretense or disguise, but as adversaries whose paths were forged long before either of them had a choice. They will fight, and Thor will slay the serpent, but not before taking 9 steps away and collapsing, lifeless, poisoned by the serpent's venom. It is a death match written into the marrow of the world itself. One does not walk away. Jörmungandr was not worshipped in the way other beings were. No temples, no prayers. People didn't ask him for favor because they knew better. He was not a god to be pleased, but a truth to be respected. Farmers and sailors knew that under their feet, under their boats, something stirred in the sea too deep for words. Some may have carved symbols, drawn his coils to ward off his fury, but no man ever claimed to understand him. His image, though, finds its way into carvings, into the endless snake consuming its own tail, what people now call the Ouroboros. But in his case, it was not a symbol of eternity and peace. but eternity, intention. He is often shown rising from the sea, arching over Thor, teeth wide, eyes unblinking. And though he has no companions like Odin's ravens or Freyja's cats, his association with venom, with tides, with storm surges and poison mist, is clear. He is the sea's deepest breath held tight, waiting. His power is not subtle. He doesn't raise the dead or whisper prophecies, but he changes the sky when he moves. He splits the ocean with a turn. He poisons gods, and when he breaks the surface, the world ends. That too is magic of a kind. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be believed, just known. In modern times, Jormungandr still lurks. You'll find him in comics and games, portrayed as a monstrous dragon or a misunderstood creature. Sometimes wise, sometimes noble, sometimes evil. But none of it ever quite captures what he really is. Because he doesn't fit. He is not a villain, not a hero. He is consequence. He is tension between beginnings and endings. The curve of a world biting its own tail, unsure if it's completing itself or consuming itself. Jormungandr is the part of us that knows no matter how far we travel, we'll eventually meet ourselves again. He's the fear of what waits in the deep, the thing we push away until the tide pulls it back. He is the inevitable weight of consequences, long delayed but never denied. He doesn't come to teach or to guide. He comes when the time is up. And when he does, the gods themselves tremble. Fenrir, a giant wolf. There are stories where the danger is obvious, roaring in your face with bared teeth and wild eyes. But sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones where the threat is born in the quiet, cradled in the hands of gods who think themselves wiser than fate. Fenrir is one of those stories. His name in Old Norse likely comes from fen, meaning marsh or mire, the sort of place where solid ground pretends to exist but gives way the moment you trust it. Fenrir, the fen dweller, the wolf of the wild, the one too large for boundaries. And though some translate the name to mean he who lives in the bog, or monster from the fen, there's something else buried in the sound of it. Something that says you can cage a storm just by naming it. He's the son of Loki, the shapeshifter, the trickster who dances on the edges of order and chaos. His mother, Angerboda, is a giantess whose very name means the one who brings grief. And grief, indeed, was what Fenrir brought, not by malice, not even by choice, but by being exactly what the gods feared he would become. From the moment he was born, he was different, not just in size, though he grew faster and fiercer than any beast ever had, but in presence. There was something about him that unsettled even Odin, the Allfather, the god who'd given up his own eye to see the future. And what he saw in Fenrir's future terrified him. But fear doesn't always lead to wisdom. The gods raised the wolf themselves for a time, letting him grow among them, testing him, measuring his hunger. He had no divine title, held no domain like war or harvest. He was not a god in the structured sense. He was a living contradiction. Born of gods and giants, fated to kill but not yet a killer. Some say he showed intelligence, perhaps even innocence in his youth. He trusted Tyr, the god of war and justice, the only one who dared to feed him. That trust would become the sharpest wound in the story to come, because the gods decided they couldn't wait for destiny to unfold. They had to bind it. They tried chains thick as the trunks of trees. Fenrir shattered them. They tried cunning and dwarven craftsmanship, forging a ribbon called Gleipnir from impossible things. Mountain roots, the breath of fish, the sound of a cat's footfall, soft as silk, but stronger than any steel. They asked Fenrir to let them test it, pretending it was a game. But Fenrir was no fool. He agreed only on the condition that someone place a hand in his jaws as a pledge of good faith. Tyr stepped forward, knowing exactly what would happen. When Fenrir found he could not break free, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand. It wasn't betrayal that broke him. It was betrayal dressed as kindness. And the gods sealed their fate that day as surely as they sealed his. Fenrir had no weapon, no magical staff or divine armor. He was the weapon. His jaws could shatter the sky. His breath could scorch the world. He was not associated with symbols, because nothing could symbolize him. He was what happened when fear becomes prophecy, when an attempt to prevent destruction creates it. No temples were ever built to honor him. No priest spoke his name in reverence. But the people knew of him. Farmers whispered about wolves at the edge of the forest and felt a chill that was older than the trees. Sailors heard howling on the wind and thought of him. Not the literal beast, but the force he represented. That there are things you cannot cage without cost. He appears most vividly in the myths of Ragnarök, the end of the gods. When the final battle begins, Fenrir breaks his bonds and runs free. His jaws open so wide they stretch from the heavens to the earth. He kills Odin, swallowing the one who feared him most. And then Odin's son, Vidar, avenges his father, not with passion, but with purpose. He drives a boot, made from the cast-off leathers of every shoe ever made, into Fenrir's jaw and tears him apart. But this is no triumph. This is the closing of a wound that never should have been opened. Neither side wins. It's a reckoning, not a resolution. As for his appearance, there are no gentle depictions of Fenrir. No soft fur or noble eyes. He's described as massive, terrible to behold. A wolf so great that even the gods pale before him. In carvings, he is often shown biting into Odin, surrounded by fire and blood, as chaos floods the world. And while he has no familiars, no birds on his shoulders or magical steeds, he is linked eternally to the wild, to the forest, to the wolf pack mentality that says survival is truth and anything weaker must fall. He has no tricks, no spells. His magic is inevitability. His power is not in deception, but in the raw certainty of his role. He was born to be the end. And though people today put him in games, in films, in comics, where he is tamed or reasoned with or made into a misunderstood soul, the old stories don't offer that comfort. They tell of a creature who was not evil, but necessary. Not cruel, but condemned. He is the rage of every wronged child, the howl of every betrayed heart. He is the cost of trying to bind what should have been understood. Fenrir stands not as a villain, but as a warning. That prophecy cannot be avoided by cruelty. That fear breeds the very monsters it dreads. He is the wild in us all, the part that will not be chained, that will not be lied to, that remembers every hand that fed us before it struck. And in that sense, he represents something deeply human. Not just destruction, but the reaction to injustice. He is the child feared by his own family, the outcast who becomes exactly what the world claims he is. And when he breaks free, it isn't vengeance, it's destiny. Sif, Thor's wife. Some figures in myth walk with thunder and rage in their footsteps. Others bloom quietly in the shadows of those storms. Sif is one of the latter. She is not known for shaking the earth, but for feeding it. Not remembered for her fury, but for her grace. Her name, in Old Norse, is thought to stem from Sifjar, meaning affinity, relationship, or connection by marriage, which in itself already suggests her role. Not as a solitary force, but as something that binds, that holds, that connects. And it's fitting, because Sif is woven into the mythic landscape not as a warrior, but as something more enduring. Life-giver, nurturer, and silent strength beneath the ground. Sif is associated with the earth, specifically the fertile fields and golden harvests that rise from it. Her golden hair, described as shining like wheat in the sun, is more than a pretty metaphor. It's a symbol of the harvest, of ripened grain, of cycles that renew no matter how hard the winters. There's a reason why her story begins not with glory, but with loss. One of the most well-known tales tells of how Loki, in one of his many mischiefs, cut off all of her hair while she slept. This wasn't just a prank, it was a desecration. To take her hair was to strip the land of its bounty. And when Thor found out, he didn't just demand an apology, he demanded restitution. Loki, fearing the thunder god's wrath, sought out the dwarves to craft Sif new hair, made from gold, enchanted to grow as naturally as the hair she lost. And so, Sif's golden hair became a mark not only of beauty, but of resilience. A stolen harvest restored. A loss that became transformation. In personality, Sif is less clearly drawn than some of the louder figures in Norse myth. The sagas don't give her speeches or battles, but they give her meaning. She is quiet, yet powerful in that quietness. She represents constancy, the steady rhythm of seasons. Her demeanor seems to lean toward gentleness, perhaps even patience. the kind it takes to till the soil, to wait for spring, to endure long nights without the need for praise or recognition. She does not carry a weapon, no hammer or spear forged for war, because her strength lies elsewhere. It lies in the way she endures, the way the land endures beneath the feet of gods and giants alike. Sif is most famously known as Thor's wife, and that title alone places her in the thick of the mythological family tree. She's not just a passive consort. She is the mother of at least one child with Thor, Thrudr, whose name means strength, and possibly others, depending on the source. There's also mention of Ullr, a god associated with skiing and archery, sometimes considered her son by another union before Thor. Like so many Norse figures, her story is laced with ambiguity and contradiction, as if the mythmakers knew that life itself rarely offers clear lines. She is wrapped into the lives of others, yet remains her own entity. In the tales of Ragnarök, Sif does not play a leading role. The myths do not tell of her death, nor do they describe her surviving. Her fate is left unspoken, like the fate of the earth itself during the great fires of the end. But in that silence, there is something telling. The land burns, yes, but eventually it blooms again. Perhaps Sif is not gone. Perhaps she is merely waiting beneath the ash. There's little historical evidence of wide worship or temples dedicated to Sif. She didn't command armies or cast spells, so perhaps her power was too subtle for the kind of devotion that gets carved in stone. But it's likely that the people who depended on harvests, who watched the color of their fields change with the sun, knew her in ways that didn't need scripture. They saw her in the golden sway of grain, in the hush of late summer evenings, in the promise of food after famine. She was not a goddess to be feared, but one to be thanked. Descriptions of her in ancient poems are sparse, but her beauty is consistently noted, always tied to her hair. That golden hair is her emblem, more powerful than a crown. She has no familiars that we know of, no beasts at her feet or birds on her shoulder, but she is deeply connected to the natural world, to grain and field and the rhythms of growth. In that sense, her familiar is the earth itself. She doesn't wield magic the way Loki does, nor see the future like Odin. But her magic is quieter. It's the alchemy of transformation, the restoration of what was taken. It is the way the land turns death into life, compost into bloom. She doesn't need to change her shape to be powerful. Her power is that she doesn't change. She endures, she returns, she waits. In modern culture, Sif appears from time to time, most notably in the Marvel Universe, where she's reimagined as a warrior, armored, and sharp-edged, perhaps to make her more palatable to a world that often mistakes gentleness for weakness. But that version, while interesting, is only one reflection in a very old mirror. The older Sif doesn't need to fight to be strong. She represents something far more ancient and fundamental, the sustainer, the one who carries life forward when others are too busy chasing glory or tearing the world apart. She has no long list of alternate names, but her symbolic presence remains intact across sources. She is the earth at its most generous, the archetype of the nurturer, not in a soft or sentimental way, but in the way the land nurtures, with patience, with quiet ferocity, with unyielding consistency. She reminds us that not all power is loud, that not every god must wield lightning to be divine. Some create by standing firm, by growing back after being raised, by giving without need for thanks. And that perhaps is what Sif truly stands for. She is the part of us that keeps planting even when we unsure the rain will come, the part that heals without fanfare, the part that glows golden not for attention, but because it is her nature. In a world of gods who roar, she is the silence that brings things to life. Skadi, goddess of winter and the mountains. Long ago, in the cold, wild silence of the northern mountains, there lived a goddess whose presence was as sharp and unyielding as the frost that clung to the peaks. Skadi, her name likely rooted in the Old Norse skadi, possibly drawn from words meaning damage or shadow. It echoes the ancient Germanic word skaduz, and from it we get words like scathe in English. But her name was more than language. It was mood, a chill, a veil of snow that hides the path beneath your feet. When people whispered of Skadi, they spoke not just of a goddess, but of winter itself, of high slopes untouched by sun, of that part of nature both beautiful and deadly. Her name wasn't just who she was, it was what she was. The embodiment of the harsh, wild places that defied man's reach. Skadi belonged to the ancient race of giants, the Jotnar, beings often painted as enemies of the gods. But the truth is more complex. Like the wilderness she represented, Skadi stood somewhere between threat and reverence. Her realm was not war or deceit or lust, like so many others in the Norse cosmos. Hers was the snow, the ice, the mountain hunt. She was the goddess of winter's bite and the echoing call of wild beasts. While others ruled over cities or seas, Skadi walked the ridgelines and hunted alone beneath the aurora. She symbolized resilience, the ability to not only endure hardship, but to draw strength from it. Where others withered in the cold, Skadi thrived. There's something timeless in that, the idea of a spirit shaped not by comfort, but by trial. Her story begins not with birth, but with vengeance. Her father, the giant Thjazi, was killed by the Aesir gods, and so Skadi, alone, armed and fearless, descended upon Asgard, demanding blood for blood. But what she found instead was compromise, and in that compromise, a strange kind of fate. The gods, perhaps out of fear or wisdom, offered her recompense, a husband of her choosing from their ranks, though only by looking at their feet. She chose the most beautiful pair, hoping they belonged to Baldr, the golden sun. Instead, they were Njords, the sea god, a union of frost and wave, cold and brine. It did not go well. She loved the mountains, he, the sea. They tried, divided their time between her highland hall in Thrymheim and his coastal home in Noatun. But neither could find peace in the other's world. The wind howled too fiercely for him. The gulls cried too harshly for her. Eventually, they parted. Not in rage, not in fire, but in that quiet resignation that two natures too different cannot be reconciled, no matter how deep the well of effort. Skadi's personality, if one could describe it in human terms, is not warmth nor cruelty, but clarity. There's a sense that she does not pretend, does not beg, does not mask herself in flattery or deceit. She is the honest cold, unadorned, unflinching. When she enters a tale, she brings the mountain with her. And yet, she also laughed. That too must be said. When the gods asked how they could ease her grief over her father, one of their offerings was laughter. Loki, tying his nether parts to a goat and tumbling in agonized humor until she smiled. And she did. Which says something. Even the harshest soul has cracks where light gets in. She carries no known weapon like Thor's hammer or Odin's spear, but one imagines her bow crafted from the bones of elk, her arrows tipped in ice. No specific artifact survived through the stories, but her power was never in items. It was in presence. Her companions are wild beasts, especially wolves, and perhaps the hardy elk of the north. Not tamed creatures, but kindred ones. They followed not out of subservience, but mutual respect. Skadi's connection to the gods is complicated. She marries Njord, aligns herself with the Aesir, but never quite belongs to them. She's a visitor in their halls, a force they accommodate but do not control. She has no known children, no great lineage echoing after her, perhaps because she herself is the echo of the old world, before Asgard's walls were built, before man thought he could tame nature with fire and steel. When the end comes, Ragnarök, Skadi's role is unspoken. The myths grow quiet about her fate, and maybe that's fitting. Perhaps she survives it all. The gods fall, the fires burn, the wolves devour the sun, but Skadi, untouched in her high peaks, continues on. Winter endures, mountains remain. When all else crumbles, the snow still falls. Her worship was never as widespread as that of Thor or Freya, but in the north, in the places where the trees give way to crags, where winter lingers longer than spring, Skadi was remembered. Hunters invoked her. Skiers, too. She is said to have worn skis before men ever carved them. In some sagas, she's even called the goddess of skiing, which might sound quaint until you realize skiing in the Old North wasn't sport. It was survival. Depictions of her are rare, but one imagines her tall, wrapped in furs, eyes like a frozen lake, bow slung over her back, skis strapped to her feet, a silence around her that feels like reverence, Not beauty in the soft, flowering sense, but in the way a storm is beautiful, distant, dangerous, real. She doesn't shapeshift like Loki, doesn't weave the threads of fate like the Norns, but she holds a different kind of power, the ability to endure without needing to change. Skadi is the mountain that does not move. In modern culture, she appears now and then. In comics, in games, in fantasy tales where winter is given a face. Sometimes she's reduced to a cold-hearted villainess, a frosty beauty. But that's the echo, not the truth. The real Skadi isn't cruel. She's just not interested in pretending to be warm. She represents a part of the human psyche that is deeply needed, the part that stands tall when things fall apart, the part that finds beauty in solitude and strength in hardship. She is the winter we all carry somewhere inside. Idun, keeper of the golden apples that keep the gods youthful. In the heart of the mythic realm where gods are shaped by thunder, war, and wisdom, there stands a figure who does not wield a weapon, does not command armies, and yet without her, even the mightiest of them would wither. Her name is Idun, pronounced with a hush of wind, soft like falling leaves, and it means something like the rejuvenating one in Old Norse. That alone tells you she was not about conquest or vengeance, but about time, or rather the quiet defiance of it. In a world where nearly everything breaks, decays, or falls to fate, Idun kept one secret locked within her arms, the golden apples of youth. Not symbolic ones, literal ones in the tales, glowing with a magic that bound the gods to their strength and beauty. Without her, the immortals would become just like us, slower, older, more fragile with each passing sunrise. She was the keeper of the flame that didn't burn, but renewed. She is not a goddess of war, nor prophecy, nor vengeance. She doesn't weave schemes or hurl thunder across the sky. She belongs to that rare and quiet realm in mythology, the guardians of what is essential but unglamorous. Youth, vitality, continuity. While Thor is busy smashing giants and Odin is off sacrificing eyes for secrets, Idun is tending to her small orchard, cradling the apples like children, knowing that without them, Asgard itself would fall to ruin. That kind of power, subtle, patient, enduring, doesn't draw the eye the way lightning does, but it's the kind of power that everything else quietly depends on. Her personality, as it's been passed down, is gentle, not meek, not naive, but soft in that enduring, unshakable way that doesn't seek conflict yet cannot be uprooted. She trusts, sometimes too much. There's a story where Loki, under pressure from the gods after he caused yet another mess, tricks her into leaving Asgard and stepping into the woods. He lies, of course, and she believes him. That trust leads to her capture by the giant Thjazi, who steals her away to the cold halls of Jotunheim. With her gone, the gods begin to age. Wrinkles form, joints ache. Their power wanes like sunlight in winter. It doesn't take long before they realize, without Idun, without her apples, they are no longer gods in any real sense. They are just stories waiting to end. And so they demand her return. And once again, it's Loki who must fix the hole he tore. He flies to the land of giants, transforms her into a nut, tucks her into the feathers of a falcon, and races home with Thjazi close behind. The gods light a fire to destroy the pursuing giant, and Idun is safe once more. But the lesson hangs in the air. Her absence was more terrifying than any monster. She carries no weapon, no enchanted artifact besides the apples themselves, though even those are not described in detail. No list of ingredients, no explanation for how they work, just that they do. And perhaps that's the point. Like the deep workings of time or memory, they do not need to be explained, only preserved. The apples are not symbols of temptation or sin as in other traditions. They are lifelines, golden vessels of something deeper than magic. They represent continuity, something sacred and unspoken. Idun is married to Bragi, the god of poetry. That too is fitting. The keeper of life and the keeper of language, two currents always flowing side by side. She gives the gods their youth. He gives them their voice. There are no tales of children between them, no tangled webs of affairs or rivalries. And in that silence, one senses something rare in myth, a simple, peaceful bond. Not born of conquest, not broken by betrayal. Just two spirits dwelling side by side in the house of quiet necessities. Her role in Ragnarök, that terrible end when the world breaks and the sky burns, is left unclear. The old texts don't say if she falls in battle or vanishes into myth. But maybe that too is a kind of survival. Perhaps she endures beyond the fire. Or maybe she vanishes like youth does, not with a scream but with a sigh. Her magic doesn't fight, it fades. There are no great temples raised to Idun, no cults shouting her name from mountaintops. But that doesn't mean she wasn't loved. In the old days, when winter clung too long and crops withered in frost, people might have whispered her name anyway. Not for victory, not for glory, but for the return of warmth, of color in the cheeks, of strength in old bones. In her, people saw the hope that time wasn't just a thief, that something golden could remain, if only for a while. Art does not often show her, but when it does, it is always the same. A woman cradling a basket of apples, her gaze calm, her expression serene. She is not adorned in armor. She does not ride a chariot. She walks, quiet, steady, eternal. Her animals, if any, are not named, but one might imagine bees in her orchard, or deer passing through, unafraid. Creatures of peace, of rhythm. She cannot shapeshift. She does not command the dead. But her magic is older in some ways, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to be felt. She preserves what is fleeting, the vigor of youth, the brightness in the blood. That's no small gift. That's something kings would trade crowns for if they understood it. In our modern world, she appears in fragments, in video games, in fantasy novels, as a figure of healing and grace. But more often, she's there beneath the surface, unnamed. She's the medicine in the story, the fruit that brings someone back from the brink, the figure whose presence restores what was lost. She's not the storm. She's what waits quietly after the storm is over. Idun is not about domination or trickery or chaos. She's about renewal, about the sacred task of holding on to life, even when everything else wants to decay. In the theater of gods and monsters, she is the one who says, softly but firmly, not yet, not today. And in that refusal to let time win, she becomes something even greater than immortal. She becomes necessary. Air, goddess, or Valkyrie. There are gods who rule over storms, who raise their voices like thunder and swing their weapons with the fury of 1,000 battles. But then, there are those who rule in the quiet, who mend what others have broken, who guide hands to heal instead of harm. Air is one of those rare ones. Her name in Old Norse means mercy, or help, or sometimes protection. And that meaning clings to her like a whisper of herbs in the air, the scent of clean bandages, the calm after a fever breaks. She is one of the lesser-known goddesses, perhaps even a Valkyrie depending on which story you hear. But her power is no less sacred. While the warriors charged into battle to earn their place in Valhalla, Air stood at the edges of that violence, not to cheer it on, but to soften the suffering that followed. She is called a goddess of healing, of medical skill, of life preserved rather than lost. In some old lists, she is counted among the Asgard, the goddesses of Asgard, and in others, she is said to be one of the Valkyries. Not the ones who ride down screaming with blood on their spears, but one who chooses the living over the dead. That ambiguity says something about her role. She straddles the line between war and peace, between what is taken and what is restored. In a pantheon often obsessed with fate and doom, she offers something else. The possibility that not all wounds have to be fatal. We don't hear much from her directly. The old sagas rarely give her voice. But that silence speaks too. Some figures are not made to shout. They were made to listen, to watch, to wait until they are truly needed. And when that moment comes, a child burning with fever, a warrior broken but not yet dead, a mother in labor with breath growing shallow, it's Air's hands that move. They do not tremble. They do not falter. They know what must be done. She carries no great weapon, no hammer or spear to cleave the world open. Instead, her tools are said to be those of the healer. Herbs, salves, perhaps runes inscribed on smooth stones or whispered in the dark. That kind of magic isn't the kind that bursts into flame. It's older, slower. A knowledge passed from hand to hand like a secret, too precious to write down. If she has a symbol, it may be a herb, perhaps chamomile or feverfew, or even a simple cup, the kind you'd offer to someone in pain. She is not there to conquer. She is there to preserve. The stories do not tell us of her parents, or her lovers, or her children. Perhaps she had them, perhaps not. But in the mythology of healing, the healer often stands slightly apart. Not because they are unloved, but because they carry a responsibility too sacred to be tangled in the dramas of desire and revenge. She is not drawn into the chaos of Loki's tricks or Thor's thundering quests. She does not hunger for power like Odin, nor fall into sorrow like Freya. Her work is constant, quiet, vital. She appears in a few surviving texts, most notably in Fjolsvinnsmal, where she is said to dwell on a mountain with a company of other healing maidens, guardians of something sacred. In that image, she becomes more than a person. She becomes an idea. That healing is not a solo endeavor, but a kind of sisterhood, a gathering of knowledge and care passed between women who work in the shadow of death and choose, over and over again, to pull someone back from its edge. Her relationships with the other gods are not well defined, but perhaps that's the point. She's not wrapped in the rivalries and grudges that so many of them carry. She moves between them all like a nurse in a hospital ward, knowing each of their stories, but carrying none of their grudges. If someone fell, she'd be there. No lectures, no judgment, just the work. When Ragnarök comes, and the sky tears apart, and the seas boil and the wolves break free, we do not know what happens to her. The myths fall quiet on her fate. But it's not hard to imagine her walking through the wreckage afterward, barefoot and calm, tending to the few that remain. Not victorious, not celebrated, just continuing. Because that's what healers do. They keep going, even when the world falls down around them. There is little evidence of widespread worship in the traditional sense. No temples built in her name that we know of. No great festivals carved into the calendar. But folk medicine passed down through generations bears her fingerprint. The herb woman in the village. The midwife who mutters old names under her breath. The quiet ones who carry bandages and bone-setting skills into battle. That's where Air lives. Not on the throne, but at the bedside. Visions of her are rare, but one could imagine her with hair tied back, sleeves rolled, eyes calm and steady. Not dressed in gold or draped in jewels, but practical, clean, ready. No serpent coils at her feet, no ravens perch on her shoulders. Perhaps a cat curls at her side, or a small bird rests near her hands. Something simple, living, gentle. If she possesses magic beyond the healing arts, the stories do not dwell on it. She does not command fire or twist the threads of fate. Her power lies in knowledge, in touch, in timing. And in the refusal to give up on life, even when all else points to death. Today, she appears in games and books, sometimes just as a name, other times as a powerful healer in a world that sorely needs one. But beyond the surface, Air continues to mean something deeper. She is the archetype of the healer, not flashy, not loud, but present, steady. The one who reminds us that pain is not the end of the story, that every cut can be mended, every fever cooled. She is the part of humanity that kneels beside a broken form and says, "I'm here. You're not alone." And in that moment, the world becomes just a little less cruel, just a little more whole. Ran, sea goddess. Some say the sea is a mother, deep, endless, full of life. Others say it is a grave, silent, and unyielding. In Norse mythology, Ran is both. She is not the storm that drowns you, nor the wave that crashes over the side of your ship. She is what waits beneath, the hand that reaches up through the blackness with a net in her grasp to take what the sea has claimed. Her name, Ran, comes from the Old Norse word for theft or robbery, and that is no accident. She does not kill. She simply takes. Silently, deliberately. There's no malice in it, but no mercy either. The sea does not explain itself. Neither does she. She rules the ocean's most private places. Not the waves where sunlight dances, but the deep currents that hold onto secrets and bones. Her domain isn't the joy of sailing or the bounty of fish. That belongs to others, like Njord, the sea god who brings ships safely home. Ran is for those who don't return. She gathers the drowned in her net, not out of cruelty, but because someone has to. The world is full of endings, and hers is one that doesn't ask for consent or forgiveness. There's a cold sort of order in it. She doesn't chase. She waits. And when the sea decides, she is already there. Her personality is not one of fire or noise. She is not a goddess who yells across the sky like Thor, nor one who schemes and plots like Loki. There is something quiet about her, and that makes her terrifying. She does not need to shout to be heard. You already feel her when the wind dies and the clouds fall heavy, when the hull of your ship groans and the crew stops singing. That stillness before the storm, that's Ran. She doesn't rage, she lures. There's an allure in that kind of danger, a calm that promises release from everything above. And yet, to fall into her grasp is to fall forever. She carries no sword, no hammer, no shield made of starlight. Her weapon is a net, a simple thing, deceptively gentle, but impossible to escape once you're caught in it. It's made not from rope or sinew, but something older, something elemental, woven from the fibers of the sea itself. With it, she collects those whom the ocean decides to keep. Sailors whisper about it. They speak her name not with reverence, but with resignation. She is not to be bargained with. You don't plead with Ran. You prepare for her. Her family, like the sea, is vast and strange. She is married to Aegir, the sea giant who brews ale for the gods and hosts feasts in his deep halls. Their union is not the stuff of love poems. It is a pairing of forces. Together, they had 9 daughters, each one a wave with a name that speaks to a different face of the ocean, from the rolling swells to the sudden crashing breakers. These daughters, like their mother, are not tame. They are part of the rhythm that claims and releases, that gives and takes without promise. Stories of Ran are not many, but they are memorable. She is not the center of grand epics or shining victories. Instead, she lingers at the edges of those tales, a name invoked when ships disappear, when warriors drown on the way to battle, when bodies are never found. In Lokasenna, the poem where Loki insults every god at a feast, Aegir is the host, and one imagines Ran nearby, silent, unmoved by the petty insults of fire gods and thunder gods. Her presence is not in what she says, but in what others do not dare say around her. She is not close to many gods. She is not drawn into their rivalries or alliances. If anything, she stands apart, not distant out of pride, but because the sea cannot be held in a hand or tied to a cause. The gods may battle over the land and the sky, but Ran watches from the depths, untouched. When Ragnarök comes and the world ends in fire and flood, she does not charge into battle. She does not fall on a sword or roar in fury. Instead, she rises. As the world cracks and burns, the sea swells, and with it, her reach. She collects the remnants, gods, men, monsters. All of them will know her net. She was not worshipped in the way some gods were, with temples and rites and songs. Sailors did not seek her favor. They feared her. They tossed coins into the sea not to praise her, but to keep her at bay. They spoke her name softly, as if too loudly would draw her attention. She was part of the everyday ritual of survival, part of the unspoken understanding that the sea gives no guarantees. In that way, her worship was woven into life itself, or the edge of it. There are no statues of Ran that we know of, no carved images passed down through the ages, but if you were to imagine her, you might see a woman with hair that flows like kelp in the tide, skin pale as moonlit water, eyes dark and deep and unreadable. She does not wear a crown. She does not need one. The ocean wears her name like a second skin. She is clothed in drift and silence, adorned not with jewels, but with salt and shadow. She is not tied to animals in the way Odin is to ravens or Freya to cats, but the sea is her creature, and everything in it belongs to her in time. The jellyfish that glow in the black, the whales that sing in the dark, the bones that drift along the bottom. All of it is hers. All of it returns to her. As for magic, she does not need tricks or incantations. Her power is not in what she changes, but what she never changes. She is constant, unmovable. She does not bend to will or fate. In that way, her magic is absolute. Death is not a curse, it is a tide, and she is the one who gathers what it leaves behind. In modern times, she appears now and then, in stories, in games, in shows where the sea is personified. Sometimes she's a villain, a monster, sometimes a misunderstood force, but always, she's something bigger than people expect. In Marvel Comics, she's appeared as a sea goddess with dominion over the deep, but such portrayals are like sketches of a storm. They give you the outline, but not the weight of it. Ran, as a symbol, is the archetype of the unknown depth, of what we fear, what we lose, and what we never get back. She represents the kind of mystery that doesn't offer resolution. In a world full of stories about heroes coming home, she is the story about the ones who don't. The ones who vanish beneath the waves and become part of something older than memory. Part of her. And in that quiet, in that inevitability, there is something sacred. Not gentle, but honest. Not cruel, but eternal. Aegir, a Jotun associated with the sea. In the vast cold reaches of the Norse cosmos, where the sea is not merely a backdrop, but a living, breathing entity with moods and memory. Aegir stands as its host, not its ruler in the strictest sense, but something far older and deeper than a king. His name in Old Norse simply means sea, which might seem simple on the surface, but in the mythology of the North, nothing is truly simple. A name like Aegir doesn't just name the waves, it is the waves. He doesn't represent the sea. He is the sea. Not the kind that tosses you around in a sudden storm or crashes against a cliff, but the kind that surrounds you when you've sailed too far, too long, and the land is only a memory. The kind of sea that feels eternal. He is a Jotun, a giant, but unlike many of his kin who rage and roar and try to tear down the gods with fire and ice, Aegir is a different sort of force. He is not a god in title, but the gods treat him as one. He hosts them, he brews for them, and they come. Even Odin sits at his table when Aegir invites. Because Aegir does not demand respect, he exudes it. His power lies in something few giants or even gods possess: dignity. He does not fight for attention, nor does he need to. The sea, after all, does not ask you to admire it. It simply is, and you either survive it or you don't. Aegir is the ocean's depth and calm, the swell that lifts your ship, the current that pulls you along. He is the master of underwater feasts, and his great hall beneath the sea is said to shine with light from golden ale kettles that never run dry. These are not just luxuries. They're symbols of something older, hospitality not as courtesy, but as power. In Norse culture, to give someone food and drink was sacred. Aegir offered that to gods, and so they came. Even Thor, even Loki. That tells you something. His wife is Ran, and their marriage is one of balance. Aegir gives, Ran takes. Aegir brews the ale, calls the feast, keeps the fire warm. Ran waits in the dark, silent with her net. Together, they are the totality of the sea's nature. Not good and evil, but the necessary halves of something massive and unknowable. They have 9 daughters, wave spirits whose names are like poetry: Himingleva, Dufa, Blodugada, and others. Each a personification of a type of wave or a sea condition. The family taken together forms a mythic ecology. They are not just a household. They are the sea itself in all its moods and rhythms. Aegir is not known for carrying weapons. His strength isn't in bloodshed, it's in presence. But his brewing cauldron, that's a magical item of its own. So large it can brew enough ale for all the gods, it became the object of an entire myth. Thor and Tyr go on a dangerous journey to retrieve it from a giant named Heimir, just so Aegir could host another feast for the gods. That says something about the man. Gods went to battle just to help him entertain. There's a story, the poem Lokasenna, where Aegir throws a feast for the gods, and Loki shows up to ruin it. Loki hurls insults, airs old grudges, and everyone grows tense. But Aegir doesn't respond with rage. He lets the drama play out. He doesn't get pulled into the pettiness, because the sea doesn't argue. It watches, it endures. His role is to provide the space, the setting, the echo chamber for the gods' truths to be heard. In a way, that's his greatest power. He allows clarity, not by speaking, but by creating stillness. Unlike Odin, who schemes in shadow, or Thor, who charges forward in fury, Aegir doesn't interfere with the plans of gods or men. He is a witness to the unfolding of fate. And when Ragnarök comes, when the world cracks and burns and the sea surges over the land, Aegir doesn't ride into battle. He doesn't fall with sword in hand. He simply rises with the tide. He watches as ships vanish beneath the waves, as fire meets water, as the gods fall into myth. And then he continues. Because the sea doesn't end. It just changes. As for worship, Aegir wasn't the kind of god people prayed to with incense or carved into stone idols, but seafarers knew him. They poured out ale before setting sail. They whispered his name before storms. Not out of devotion, but respect, the same kind you give to a force that can end you without trying. There were no great temples, but his presence was in every fjord, every ship deck, every moment of silence when the horizon was all water and no land. He is rarely depicted in detail in ancient sources. We imagine him old, perhaps, but not frail. Bearded like the froth on a wave, eyes like tide pools that know more than they show. His hall, it said, glows with gold, not because he hoards wealth, but because even deep in the sea, there is warmth. A kind of light that comes not from fire, but from tradition, memory, and the act of gathering others around you. Animals do not follow him. He doesn't need familiars. His companion is the sea itself, and everything in it. Every fish that darts away in fear, every jellyfish that pulses through the black, every shipwreck resting on the ocean floor. That is his entourage. He does not perform magic in the way Odin or Freya does. He doesn't change form, doesn't cast illusions. But his magic is the deeper kind. The ability to host peace among chaos. To create stillness in a world full of noise. To hold space, quite literally, for gods and monsters alike. His strength is in stability, in rhythm, in the quiet, humming breath of the deep. In the modern world, Aegir appears now and then in games and books and films, sometimes confused with other sea gods. But most of these depictions miss the point. He's not Poseidon. He's not a king of crashing waves and wrath. He's something subtler. He is the calm before the storm, and after it. He is the ocean when it forgets the sky. He is what you face when the land is gone, and all you have left is time. Symbolically, Aegir stands for that deep part of human nature that seeks meaning not in conquest, but in connection. He is the host, the keeper of community, the soul who opens his home even to those he knows will bring trouble. He represents the strength in silence, the power in patience, and the rare, enduring peace that comes from understanding you are part of something much larger than yourself. The sea does not ask you who you are. It shows you. And in Aegir's hall, lit with golden kettles and ringed with laughter and silence alike, all things, gods, giants, mortals, come to rest, if only for a moment. And so the tales of gods and giants, of war and wisdom, love and loss, come to a close. For now. From the thunderous might of Thor, to the silent vengeance of Vidar, from the beauty of Freya, to the chaos of Loki, the Norse pantheon is less a list of names and more a reflection of all that makes us human. And more than human. If these ancient stories stirred something in you, a spark of curiosity, a whisper of the old ways, or just a newfound love for myth and magic, then let your voice echo back through the Bifrost. Drop a like, strike the subscribe rune, and let the algorithm know you ride with the gods. Until next time, may Odin's wisdom guide you, may Thor's hammer shield you, and may Loki at least keep things interesting. Skull, travelers. See you in the next saga.